really good. So there we are. We don't want research. Local universities can't grow because we have too many consultants dumping on them. I don't know why the government makes universities. Everybody tells them to make universities. They make a university a day. The universities are professorless, but nobody listens to them anyways. So PIDE is saying deregulate the market. We've calculated the footprint of the government over, wrong figure, 70, 80%. We've calculated the cost of every regulation, not every, but we've done a lot. The cost of regulations well over GDP. We are a controlled communist economy. We haven't completed the Washington Consensus. So PIDE is saying, please let the economy breathe. People have stopped investing because, hey, A, we are looked upon with suspicion. B, we have to go through 10,000 files. 5, we have to go to many, many, many permissions. The extent of permissions is amazing, and we have to talk about that. But then society is finished. Now, Durra Nayab has done this famous survey called Basics. She has shown you how trust in society is diminished, gone to hell. If you like, please go to the PIDE website, look at it. But we are fixed on tax GDP ratio. In a broken society, going with colonial institutions, with all these things, we are fixed on tax GDP ratio. Investors are scared. Youth, her survey has checked, youth wants to leave the country. Youth is really, really unhappy because they've got no opportunity. But we don't want opportunity. We want to tax. We'll tax, so we'll get opportunity. Is that socialism? I don't understand this at all. But nevertheless, what about PIDE reform? All these areas, every area is a governance issue. Please, this thing about thinking that you can push through some little, like for example, they push through 100 regulatory agencies. We got the Competition Commission, we got this, we got Fannie Mae, we got all those things because they want to bypass the system and build more. We keep building things. We get nothing. Competition Commission, we didn't need it, but they built it. We didn't need all these agencies, they built it. But now, we've got a deeply centralized system, a colonial system that was made by the East India Company that centralizes everything. Take, for example, PIDE, a small little research institute, but it is every few days the bureaucracy bothers us on some little detail. No technology anywhere, excessive government job security. We've calculated the cost of a government servant is huge, and their pension lasts for 2 generations, 3 generations. They can never be fired. I fired 2 people from the fund, and we've had 7 court cases for 5 years. That's the kind of job security you have. Every minister has come to me, take them back. They don't want to do anything, but I have to take them back. This is what we have. No results-based management. I tried to do performance review, they killed me. There's no markets, no performance review. Everybody has a socialist mindset. So hell, let's declare ourselves as Union of Socialist Soviet Pakistan. But no, we have to have tax GDP ratio. Okay, look at our, we've got stunted companies. The largest company in Pakistan, a country of 250 million people, is $2 billion. And it's a government-owned company. Do we have capitalism here? Do we have a market? This nonsense has to stop. We've got a stunted stock market. A stock market is 5% of GDP. It doesn't grow. Privatization. I just saw PIS being privatized. It's going to be privatized to the same crony capitalism. What do you call it in the Soviet Union? Sorry? No, what do you call this thing in the Soviet Union? In Russia, when they nomenclatura. We create a nomenclatura the way we privatize. I keep saying, why can't we privatize on the stock market? Why don't you do it neat and clean? No, we have to hire Ernst & Young or PwC or whatever, give them millions of dollars, and then give it to a local Seth or whatever. Seth, who was exporting, is now running a corporate. I mean, it's just a disaster as far as I can see. These stunted companies, small stunted companies, the corporate governance is such that the board members of these companies are basically a very small club, and thanks to USAID, there was a new licensing agency was set up called the Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance. Now, I cannot become a board member unless I go through that, get a license from there. Hafiz Pasha, all our best people can't become boards of directors. So we got great licensing agency. Soviet Union again, but built by the USA, not by us. Why should people invest? Every day a random taxation comes in, like the 7E that's being discussed now, that your deemed income is going to be taxed, that your clothes are going to be taxed. Last year my foot was taxed. The year before my hand was taxed. The year before, not even year before, sorry, the year before. No, we raise taxes every day, you know. I mean, somebody's, what do you call it, computer was taxed. Yeah, this mobile phone, for God's sake, do you know how expensive this is? This is over $2,500. $1,000 of taxes. Why? Because we are so hungry for taxes. We need taxes. No opportunities, doesn't matter. Negative interest rates. Insanity. Shall I say more? We do the same old thing. Oh, real estate. My God, we hate real estate. We hate real estate. Doesn't matter that construction is a leading indicator. Doesn't matter housing starts are a leading indicator. There's a huge history for leading indicators. Doesn't matter, the construction is the first thing you do. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no real estate in this country, first of all. We only have plots. That's why the name is Plotistan. We have t-shirts for you, you can buy them. Plotistan written here, two things. One is Permissionistan, the other is Plotistan. Plotistan because we build plots. Why do we build plots? Because the colonial system doesn't want real estate. They hate real estate. They don't like construction. But we all hate real estate because hearsay says real estate is bad. Show me where real estate is. We've got the smallest construction industry in the world. It's a pathetic construction industry. Whatever we have to build, we have to get from overseas. There's no real construction houses. Not a single construction company on the stock exchange. We have no downtowns. They say you can't build anything, so there's no downtowns. 2-floor limit. The only thing we can build in Pakistan is a 2-floor house. Nothing else. Nothing else. But this regulation we don't notice. We say, no, please tax more. Tax that bloody 2-story house to death. Doesn't matter. Let him go out of his house. Why is construction not there? So you should ask yourself that. What is the policy and reform? Nobody looks at this. Our policy model still remains a two-gap model. The old two-gap model, which was translated here by Mehbubullah and Harvard Advisory Group. The two-gap model basically says, look for dollars, do projects. There's no policy. That's all we do. We look for dollars. As you can see, our Prime Minister he's been here for 2 months, and he's made 2 trips to Saudi Arabia, making a trip to China. All our Prime Ministers, if you take their trips, they're going, looking for money, and all we do is projects. We have no policy. The only policy we have is that donors come and give us, do a PICG, do this, that, etc. We follow. We say, okay, fine. We do it without thinking. Capacity building. This term is very strange. I'd love to go into this term. We used to have capacity in this country, even though it is colonial capacity. The best people in the bank and the fund at one point were Pakistanis. What happened? We've lost everybody. Now we have no capacity. The brain drain is taking place. Who talks about it? I was amused today. The PBC, the Pakistan Business Council, had a report there saying, save your talent. Don't think about a policy to bring your talent or save your talent. No, I wouldn't say bring them back, but have a policy to bring your talent back. So, PIDE is saying regulatory guillotine. Get rid of, do one-step deregulation, quick deregulation. Decentralize, autonomize, professionalize. Forget this thing about the old civil service. Let's have professionals everywhere. One of the reasons that we've had this energy crisis for this, loss in energy of $11 trillion over the last 20, 30 years is because we do not professionalize the energy sector, and we don't want to. Colonial civil service resists professionalizing the sector. It is no wonder that the only professional who was brought into the government in 2015 or 16, Imran al-Haq, he was thrown in jail, 5 years of his life wasted, and now we tell him he was innocent. That's how much we hate professionals. And we want the old civil service to continue. Nobody wants to corporatize and list. In this country, there's no firm that is not family owned. There is no firm that is largely on the stock market. Simplified taxation. We can simplify taxes. We've been working on it. Digitize the thing. Don't put on tax after tax like the IMF does. Every 3 months, they put in a mini budget. I'm sorry to say, That's the truth, and I wish Esther had been here to answer that. And we should have a commitment to openness. Let's not just talk words. Let's not just say, hey, my accounts need another 500 billion, I have to get it from tariffs, because it's easy to get. Let's not say GST should be on tariffs, which is a joke. Nowhere else in the world does it happen. Why don't we follow those principles? There are no markets anywhere. There are no markets anywhere. All these markets don't exist. And yet, we make these horrible cars that we don't export. And the interesting thing is, when we tell them to export, Toyota, the largest car maker in the world, that exports from many countries, tells us, I can't export from here. Jesus, what kind of nonsense is this? And our state doesn't have the guts to stand up, and our friends, the World Bank and IMF, don't say, okay, let them go. I say, let them go. Please let them go. They export or get them out. In fact, we are proposing a super tax on them if they don't export. Enough of this nonsense. I can't use a harsh word, but they have done many bad things to us over the last 50 years. Ladies and gentlemen, our fund program. We need a deep reform. Let's stop pussyfooting around with little taxes and with little this and pretend that we're a normal country. No, we ain't. We're a colonial construct. We need to become a modern country. Help us think through this reform and make it a modern country. We're a socialist country. Help us think through either markets or go towards socialism or go towards Islam, but we must make a clear decision. This thing about tax means we forget about all the real problems. Tax is not the main issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadeem Saab. 2024 definitely requires reforms to manage the modern world. As we believe, local research, local solutions, so it's time to hear from the World Bank's perspective, what are the reforms for a brighter future? And I would request Matthew Verghese, Regional Director for South Asia, the World Bank, to present us. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I was last in Pakistan and attended the PIDE World Bank conference on reforms for a better future. And so it's a real pleasure to be back here to follow up on that. I hadn't realized that I'd also get the opportunity to listen to Nadeem hold forth in one of the more interesting speeches that I've heard. So that's been a pleasure. Thank you. So I'm hesitating a bit whether to launch into my program or to comment on Nadeem, but I think I'll try and I'll try and stick to my program and maybe weave in some points from Nadeem's discussion. But actually, let me just make 2 points. I think the program that Nadeem presented is something that we would support very much, with possibly 2 exceptions. So the core of what you're proposing, I understand, is that Pakistan needs to be a much more open and private sector oriented economy. And we would fully agree with that. The 2 points where I think there would be some disagreement would be, one, on this question of whether we should care about poverty, whether we stay at the Serena or not when we visit. So my view is that we should care about poverty, because even if you do have an economy that is open, that is market-oriented, there would still be a space and a need and an imperative to have a government program that actually tries to help the poor. So that might be one area of difference. The other is on the question of taxes. So it's not so much that anybody likes taxes, including the IMF or the World Bank, but what we've learned very painfully, and I imagine Nadeem doesn't disagree with this, is that persistent fiscal deficits don't lend themselves to a position, to a country to grow and to have a thriving private sector. And so it's the combination of taxes and expenditures. The level of taxes actually in Pakistan are not, the taxes that are actually collected are not that high. And there is space to do more, and there's a need to do more. But one of the central themes of what I'm going to say is that it needs to be done better. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this first chart, but it's simply to make the case that I think Nadeem was also making, that over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, there hasn't been real progress, and Pakistan is falling behind some of its neighbors, and there's absolutely no need for that. So there is a need for change. Next slide, please. So fiscal deficits have slowed growth. So this is the point that actually addresses this question of whether we need to tax more or not. If expenditures are cut further, then we don't need to tax more. But if we believe that governments have a role to spend on absolutely critical things, then they must find a way to pay for them. And the basic way to do that is through taxes. So you need to have a balanced macroeconomic situation. The fiscal deficits have slowed growth, they have constrained public investment, and they've also crowded out private investment. Next slide, please. Now, here's a point that I think hasn't been discussed very much. So the focus on fiscal adjustment has been very much about the need for macroeconomic stabilization. And that is true. That was the point of the previous slide. What we are finding, so this work that we've been doing through our poverty team has been finding, is that the combination of taxes and subsidies that is present in Pakistan actually doesn't contribute to reducing poverty. In other countries, it reduces inequality, but not in Pakistan. And so the combination of taxes and subsidies tend to be very high, and they are not targeted to the poor at all, and they don't benefit the poor, they benefit everybody. And as a result, the combination of taxes and subsidies don't benefit the poor. And that's a very unusual thing in Pakistan. You probably can't see it over there, but it's the place where it reduces inequality the least compared to all of the other countries. Next slide, please. And not surprisingly, the quality of public expenditure is such that human development outcomes remain poor. So Pakistan has the highest infant mortality rate and the prevalence of stunting in the region. And here again, this would be something that government action and government expenditure would be useful to help address. All of this to say, so the point of all of this is to say that the need for fiscal and governance reforms has to be an imperative part of the reforms that are needed for a brighter future for Pakistan. It shouldn't come from colonial institutions. It should come from domestic institutions. But that, I think, is the need of the day. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Matthew. So we have a long list of reform agendas, but we are focusing on fiscal and governance reform agendas today. So our first agenda of the day is public administration for the 21st century. It will be presented by Dure Nayab, Joint Director, PIDE. I would request presenters to take 15 minutes so we can have a response on it and then take questions from the audience.
We were told 20 minutes and now it's 15 minutes just because of you. Yes, yes, because you spoke longer than 10 minutes. Okay, so PIDE had a whole, we called it Reform Manifesto, and it had 10 points. And today we were, WorldBank and PIDE both have their own agendas, and each had to pick 2 points, 2 agenda items which they thought were the most important. And we went with deregulation and reforming the administrative structure. Public administration for the 21st century, it's the most ignored and least understood topic, yet the most critical one. As Dr. Nadeem said in his presentation, irrespective of what we look at, it's always the governance issue. Spending more money is not going to help us unless we fix our structures. I mean, even if we take issues which are moral issues, which are ethical issues, very important social issues, be it poverty or education or health, unless we fix our administrative structures, no amount of money is going to remove or reduce poverty or improve our educational status or even health. I did a quick analysis of highs, and I just wanted to look at how health status is affected by education and by income, and it was income that had a bigger impact than education. Without money, you just can't do anything. Of course, they have a two-way relationship. So when we say that we need a reformed public administration system, structure for the 21st century, it includes everything. Governments, ministries, the civil bureaucracy, judiciary, public servants who are not CSS, then autonomous agencies and local government. I have to be quick. ये चल नहीं रहा। ये रखा कहाँ हुआ है? इस तरफ है? हाँ। Our cabinet sizes are huge. If you look at our document, you will see some of our cabinets are over 80 ministers big. So what this large cabinet does to the governance structure is that politicians, when they run for elections, they are not exactly aiming to be legislators, they want to be ministers. So politicians aiming for ministries instead of legislation, key positions entrusted without tangible work experience and relevant education. It's just that we like this person, he's close to us, he's one of our family members. That's how ministries are divided, irrespective of whether that person has the talent or not. Power consolidation, making relevant decision-making forums irrelevant. If there is a huge cabinet, voting in the parliament hardly makes sense. So we believe that there should be a separation of parliament and executive, limit cabinet members. The role of a minister is to oversee, no ministry for technical departments. And for this, we usually give example of railways. Why do we think that railway can be run, or even communication or information, by one random person? It's a very, very technical area, and you need technical people for it. Induct experts in cabinet. Cabinet should focus on policies and monitoring and evaluation instead of price setting, giving permissions, breaking or changing the budget. Budget making is a legal process. I mean, the way mini budgets come in Pakistan, it's totally unconstitutional. You just can't keep bringing mini budgets without the approval of the parliament. I mean, basically, it becomes a race for PSDP. Currently, there are 53 ministries, and after the 18th amendment, we had an estimation all the federal government needs is maximum of 13 ministries. Then there are 206 autonomous bodies working under these 53 ministries. Many have no function at all, and some have overlap functioning. Then there is the role of ministries in these autonomous bodies. These ministries have become license dispensing agencies relying on the assistance of many donor agencies, and they are mainly executing the political agenda. It's not what the country needs, it's what whoever the government is thinks that it should be done. We believe that it's time that we need to trim the number of ministries at the federal level. Ministries should be a place of policy making, and we need to engage local academia. I mean, this is one theme that you'll see will be there in everything we say. Involvement of local people. We know best what we need. Of course, we need to take advice, but in the end, it's the local, it's our future, and we need to think what our future should be. Then every ministry should have a report which should be public, white papers, what the ministry is doing, what their programs are, how they are spending money. It should be a transparent system. Coming to civil bureaucracy, it's outdated. It's incapable of dealing the issues of the 21st century. It's a totally broken system. Dr. Nadeem talked about those files, those FITA files. I mean, in the 21st century, those huge pile with a string, I mean, it's strings attached in every possible way, physical and otherwise. Then the training that they are giving. There is just a question of seniority. You get promotions on security. You get nominated for even further trainings on the basis of seniority. The issue of performance is a very, very trivial issue there. It's, in many cases, it's not even something that's looked at. The incentive structure. We did a study on it. We know that the civil service is angry, but we are still waiting for actual comments. We want them to be paid very, very good salaries, but it should be a one-line salary. Just give them a good package without the current case where there are cash poor and perks rich. Then the civil bureaucracy remains suspicious of the markets, controlling prices, quantities, investments, and other operations. We are, right now, we can see what's happening with wheat procurement. Prices were set, we have the harvest, but we ordered huge import is there at the port, and the farmer is just confused what to do with the produce. Who ordered this? This whole controlling business is just putting, Dr. Nadeem stresses markets a lot. I would say, I mean, there has to be something functional. Bureaucracy or somebody sitting in the cabinet, they can't control everything. So PIDE believes that we have to eliminate the generalist colonial examination. It's just one exam for everything. No lifetime employment. You have to factor in performance. End of tribes, I mean, when we came out with this report that I talked about, cash rich, cash poor, perk rich, we mentioned that there are few cadres who are getting much more than the other ones. And we got a lot of criticism from the richer ones in public and a lot of praise from the poorer ones in private. There is a lot of difference between different cadres. So there needs to be an end of tribe. Ensure higher mobility. I mean, all positions should be made public and everyone should be able to compete for it through an open competition. Market-based competitive compensation and a single line salary. I've already talked about it. Technology is there, we need to digitize. End of these FITA files. FITA is string, those huge piles which are tied up with a string. There has to be a cooling off period. I mean, a high official right after retirement cannot just directly go into an important position I mean, in many cases, it's almost conflict of interest. So there has to be a cooling off period. Options for early retirement, rethink the training mechanism. You can involve academia. Then there has to be a training need assessment that what exactly is the kind of training that the civil servant needs. Judiciary. Dr. Nadeem talked about our basic survey. We asked a question in that survey that about every institution, what is the trust level? The trust level in Pakistan is lowest for the judiciary. I mean, we even had qualitative interviews, and we asked if you have to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you trust judiciary? Many of them said -10. So, and law and economics are tied with each other. There is a need to understand this nexus. Judicial system is facing, I mean, there is a huge backlog. We've written 2 million just yesterday. I heard the Chief Justice say that now there are 2.4 million pending cases. The whole Code of Civil Procedure, it's archaic, it's dated, and it's living in the colonial system till now. Dispute resolution takes a lot of time. There are cross-court appeals, one appeal after another from one court to another court. Then there are a lot of adjournments. Then obtaining stay orders, injunctions is very easy. I'll skip this. This is the pendency of cases and disposals in the Supreme Court. We think that the procedures need to be amended. reduce multiple hearings and adjournments, fix a maximum limit. A case cannot go on forever. I mean, in some cases, it's the next generation still stuck on the cases that started during their grandparents' time. There has to be a cost of adjournment. Any party, if they ask for adjournment, there has to be a cost for it. Establish an e-port for judges and lawyers, a consolidated one. There is a portal, but it's just for one type of courts. It's not across the court. So one biggest reason for adjournment becomes that I had a case at the High Court, so I'm not available for the Supreme Court. I was at the Civil Court, so I'm not available for the High Court. You need to have an e-port where all judges and lawyers' engagements are there. Public servants, non-civil service ones. I mean, these autonomous bodies, we see one new body every day. At times you feel that it's becoming a dumping ground to accommodate people. So the recruitment process is very poor. They are usually based on political considerations instead of capacity of the candidate or requirement of the organization. And again, it ensures lifetime employment. And if you factor in pension as well, it goes to next generation as well. I'll skip this. It has federal secretariat, the autonomous bodies, the attached bodies, the armed forces, the constitutional bodies. And this is a PIDE study where we calculated the cost of the lifetime cost of the public servant. It runs into millions, even at the starting level of BPS 1. I've got the warning, so I'll be quick. Right sizing, professionalizing, of course. Introduce modern human resource management system, modern salary system, and it should be a marketplace for career development, not just that I've spent 5 years, so I deserve a promotion. I've spent 10 years, I deserve a promotion. There should be some career progression where the skills are also improving. Instead of offering permanent position, offer contract-based appointment. Of course, then the factor of performance is directly linked. Even when the organizations are autonomous, we have a principal accounting officer. Dr. Nadeem has already told about it. I won't go into details. That's the way how a bureaucratic control is maintained on an autonomous body. It is autonomous, but it's not exactly autonomous. Local government. There can be no democracy without local government. And this is something that Pakistan has been dithering since ever. We get some sort of local government, and then we don't have a local government. Decentralization will only be achieved. We have 18th Amendment, but we still see a lot of centralization. Decentralization will only be achieved if the locally elected councils are given autonomy in their spendings and planning decisions. Public service delivery is the responsibility of the local government. All these drainage, water, sewerage, these are not the tasks of federal or provincial governments. These are the tasks that are to be done by the local government. Local government implies administration, not just local politics. In Pakistan, everything is too politicized. I mean, instead of performance and function, we are stuck in politics. So local government should actually devolve power, financial and operational, and we need to get out of this colonial civil service. I mean, we did try, ironically, it was a military ruler, Musharraf, that brought in some sort of local government, but it was the civil bureaucracy that felt that their power was diminishing with the Nazim being there. Local government system that respects heterogeneity among cities and rural urban areas. There should not be any template. I mean, if we are saying that it's a local government, let them evolve in the local perspective. Local government should have autonomy to determine their own comparative and competitive edge. I'll just end by saying that, I mean, we often hear these words, the system is too rotten. We don't have trust on the system. system hi kharab hai. We know this system is unequal. We know so and so person benefit from this system. But why is it that we never talk of fixing the system as the first reform that has to be there before all other reforms become effective? So our government needs to be reformed and configured for the 21st century, and without these reforms, we believe that we'll remain in the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a response from World Bank. Iram Takir, Public Sector Specialist from World Bank, will give a short 5-minute response to this presentation, and afterwards we'll take question and answers. Questions?
Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everybody. And thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss this very important topic here. I would also like to congratulate PIDE for this very good presentation and for sharing a very useful, interesting data to support your argument here. We mostly agree, with the key issues which have been highlighted here and the proposed way forward as well. Several other reports and survey-based data sets also sort of are in agreement with what you are discussing here. We look at Global Integrity Index, we look at Prosperity Index, we look at World Governance Index, and several others. They basically point to the same problem. Sorry. The state's ability to deliver services is broadly challenged by 3 weaknesses in the state's effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability. Now, the efficiency side is mostly going to be covered by my colleague Derek here in terms of revenue mobilization. But you've actually pointed out a lot about accountability and effectiveness here, where it is hampered by the patronage-prone political system, frail administrative capacity, weak provincial and local governments, and shortcomings in the justice system. So all these things, we notice that they are part of your presentation, so that's pretty good way of presenting it. Now, taking it from the top, we feel that the political system is generally characterized by the patronage politics over issue-based politics here. Who or how the government is formed, the coalition government or the single party forming the government, this sort of is linked with the way cabinets are going to be formed and how the governments are the legislature or executives are going to work going forward. Your slide, which really shows the numbers about the cabinet and the civil servants, is very powerful and shows the message there. Secondly, the number of ministries and the government officials need to be aligned, with the redefined responsibilities after the 18th Amendment to the Constitution of Pakistan. There are also macro-fiscal challenges there and the demand-side pressure, which sort of poses an urgency there. Another important area which is discussed in your paper or your presentation is about civil service reforms. Civil service, we all know very well, is the driver of the state's machinery. And their efficiency determines states' effectiveness in performing their core functions. On civil service reform, a lot has been said, but little has been done so far. Several committees and task force were formed, reports were prepared, but never fully implemented. Major reforms were done, we know, in 1973. After that, another attempt was made in 2000s, where under National Reconstruction Bureau, they tried to make some changes in civil service, focusing more on the local government reforms. But most of these reforms were either partially implemented or faced reversal. So I was reading somewhere, at the time of Pakistan's independence, the country inherited about 95 civil servants and around 300 Class 1 officers. This group later in 1960s was declared as agents of change because they tried to address the key challenges at that time with very few resources. However, with the passage of time, we saw that things changed. But the question is, what happened? We've been all trying to find out the reason there. Over time, the best and the brightest started avoiding the civil service. Politicization impaired the government's capacity to create a friendly business environment or render public services the way those were needed. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, explained the weaknesses in this way. He says that the government is generally weak, it is expensive, it's cumbersome, centralized, and inefficient. As a way forward, as you've already pointed out, instead of a piecemeal approach, there is need for a reform package. We should cover whole value chain of the human resource policies and the broader reforms. The political economy side of these reforms is also very important that need to be considered. Why previous reforms failed, why those were not properly implemented. That can also provide some good guidance here. There's also need to learn some lessons from international good practices. For example, I was yesterday reading from one of the news articles from a former civil servant, Mr. Aizaz Ahmed. And he shared an example from a flourishing business, and a Pakistani business was established in Vienna. And that business basically it's a restaurant, it serves to the local community and also serves to the tourists as well. But when he spoke to the business owner, he gave most of the credit for his success to the enabling business environment. His restaurant is regularly inspected by the government officials. There is no expectation or demand for bribes. So this and similar other examples, invite our attention to learn and, to learn from those and, try to find out the answers to the questions. What makes the other governments and their functionaries do their job more effectively and honestly? I think it is high time that the Pakistan makes implementation of the civil service reforms. They should make it a priority right now to modernize the civil service, to position it to develop, interpret, and implement government policies, which are designed to promote growth and development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iram. I'll request Dr. Nayab to please come on the stage for the question answer session. We'll take 3 questions in each round, and there can be multiple rounds depending on the time, and then we'll go back for the answers.
Everyone agrees with me. There are no questions.
And thank you, Dr. Nasser, for excellent presentation. You rightly mentioned the reforms in all these sectors, especially the redundant ministries and departments. But the question is, who will be basically take initiative to either abolish these departments, because the rents are linked with these ministries and departments, and especially the bureaucracy as well as politicians wants these departments. So my simple question, who will be the leader in all these initiatives, because this is something that we are lacking.
I think we have to demand first. And those who make these autonomous bodies and create these ministries are the ones who have to demolish it. But the demand has to come from us. I mean, we just had an election. How many times did you hear any debate, even on media, talking about these issues? So you need to have a critical mass talking about these issues to build pressure. I mean, it has to be ultimately the decision makers, and we have to force them to make these decisions.
A quick, not a question, comment. Often we blame the civil servants because they are the ones which are at front. But what we miss at the back is the whole system. You have partially mentioned about it, the public accounts, but there are other systems as well, such as the rules of the business, and a lot of other statutory requirements which a civil servant has to actually follow. So that actually makes them believe on the status quo or follow the inertia, or at least not take the responsibility. So when we talk about the civil services reform, let it not just be the humans, but it's the system which actually is involved in this total civil side of the business. That is actually going to solve the problem.
That's exactly the point is, we have to reform the whole system. That's why we had so many actors. It was not just the civil service, those in the civil services, the whole system. We are still being run by the system that the Gora left us with. This is just not being said metaphorically. Like I was supervising a thesis on mental health, and it was still the Lunacy Act of 1835 that was still in practice. 1835, actually the 19th century. So the whole system needs a revamping, and there are no villains here. All of us, even you and I, are part of this system. That's why I said, we keep talking about system, but nobody is exactly reforming the system. And just looking at one piece, ignoring the other, is not going to help us. Once this whole, just make it a system that is for the 21st century. I think the FITA file is the best symbol of how our system is run.
Ma'am, the 18th Amendment abolished quite a few matters that the Federation would deal with. All the ministries were supposed to be finished.
Yeah.
Not a single one was.
Yes.
And we had duplication of those in the provinces, as well as proliferation in the name of coordination.
Yeah.
So, there was a serious attempt by people at the top to reduce the size of government, but why didn't it happen?
I won't say it's rent-seeking, but there are interests of people. Like I said, that there are 53 ministries, and our estimate says that there should be just 13 ministries at the federal level now, after this devolution. There are jobs, there are interest. It's hold on power, and at times, there are factors like some of, what should I say? A donor would maybe like to interact just with one body instead of 5 bodies. So there are a lot of factors. But I think the first factor is that we have to change the mindset and bring it to the 21st century. This holding of power, it is basically power. And with power comes money, so it's everything. Like I said, that everyone who runs for an election is not running for an election to be a legislator, but to be a minister. Even if you look what's happening right now, even those who lost the recent election, they are being inducted as a minister. So it's all about power and money, and that's what exactly needs to be reformed.
This is Mehtab, I work for the news. Ma'am, my question is, as you have talked about the political issues as well during your suggestion on immediate reforms, don't you think now the time has come when we should speak the whole truth?
Yes.
The first problem is the rules of the game. And
Agreed.
the rules of the game starts where the power lies. And the power lies from military, then judiciary, then politicians, then civil bureaucracy. It's the easy punching pad that we only criticize the politicians. I am not the spokesman of the politicians, but don't you think now the time has come when we should say enough is enough, rather than punching only those where is the easy target? For instance, I am a journalist. It's very easy to target only the politicians. And the same goes to the economist, and same goes to the academia and everyone else. So don't you think the rules of the game is the major issue, where everyone should restrict its role only where it allows the Constitution and the rules of the business and the oath which he takes at the time of his appointment? And for judiciary, why don't you suggest
Yes.
the entry into the judiciary? For instance, it's the liked ones who have been inducted into the judiciary. And on civil service reforms, don't you think that all the suggestions and recommendations made by different governments, and especially Dr. Rashid Hussain, I don't want to say something very harsh, but I think all those reforms were only meant to spend the time, and there was no implementation phase. So where we should start so that we can fix the problem? And on last thing, on taxation, there is no other solution that on medium terms, I totally agree with the PIDE. But on the short-term basis, how we should fix the fiscal deficit? Should we spend more energies and time to reduce expenditure side? And what should be the sequencing of those reforms? Thank you.
Dr. Nadeem, that's a question for you. See, you were talking. Come here, on the tax issue. Come. Mehtab asked you a question. आप सुन नहीं रहे थे ना? And I mean, Mehtab, I couldn't agree more. Yes. You've talked about the military, I would say yes. It's a huge problem. I mean, anybody denying that? नहीं, ये मुझे देने दे. Everyone has to restrict themselves to what is the function of that institution. And sadly, in our case, no one is interested in their own work, they are interested in the work of other institutions. They have to limit, and where do we start? I think it's not a sequential thing, everyone needs a reform. And wait. आपको टैक्स के लिए बुलाया टैक्स के लिए क्या कह रहा है मैं जवाब अब मैं बात भूल गई हूँ अच्छा चलिए
देखें hang on एक चीज पहली ये चीज है कि you guys keep thinking of only one problem, the forge. Okay, fair enough. But the point is, who's stopping the politicians from giving us local government? Who's stopping the politicians from doing a civil service reform? Who's stopping the politicians from stopping employment in the government? Who's stopping the politicians from doing pension reform? So please, let's just not think there's a one variable problem here. And who's stopping the rest of the world, our partners, development partners, from giving extra loans to these governments? Who's stopping us who's making us make new companies? For example, why do we have a Fannie Mae? Why do we have a competition commission? Why do we have so many agencies that we don't need? So honestly, and where is Parliament working? Does Parliament sit down and do anything at all? Parliament hasn't met since they bloody made the government. Prime Minister never goes to the Parliament. So let's be clear, everybody's at fault here, but we really, instead of looking at one variable problem, we have to start defining the problem as we did. Let's professionalize the government. And I think the World Bank, IMF, everybody should say, professionalize the bloody government. Enough of this M.A. Angrezi. Tomorrow morning, you'll be civil health secretary, yesterday education secretary, then health secretary. This should stop. We should bring in professionals. The energy problem is a pure governance problem, where we will not allow the engineers or the people who know the energy sector to be empowered. Where if I bring in a CEO from outside, I can't pay him. This system, this thing, the politicians can do without the army meddling. Yes, judiciary reform is necessary. Once again, we need to work on the system. The problem is we have no ideas. We think throwing money at the problem and doing fiscal consolidation is all that's required. Yes, fiscal consolidation is all right, but fiscal consolidation on a broken system means nothing. Might as well have a deep crisis. This is my answer, Matthew. Might as well have a deep crisis. I used to tell this to Muhammad Al-Arian. I used to tell this to Malcolm Knight. Please let my country sink. Then maybe we'll learn. Thank you. Tax क्या है? क्या कह रहा है? Tax पे क्या कह रहा है? What is your tax question?
ये तो short term है, long term है. What do we do in the short run?
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you do in the short run? What?
His question was, if we don't tax, then what is the short-term solution for?
Close down the bloody houses. Close down the cars. Stop buying cars, stop buying. Yesterday, the other day, I saw in Serena a Maybach. Maybach is a $1 million car with a green number plate. Can we stop this fleet of cars? Sell the government airplanes. We got the largest fleet of government airplanes in the world. For God's sake, sell them. There's so many things to do. It's not just tax.
Assalamualaikum. Sir, मेरा नाम Dr. Arshad Mahmood है. I'm Federal Secretary Overseas Pakistanis Ministry. I'm very honored to be here. और you are very famous for like थोड़ा सा pungent भी और reality based आप जवाब देते हैं.
Thank you.
I don't think any government tries to basically fail its governance structure or एक नेक नीति से they try to put up a reform agenda. I know that 2-2.5-3 साल आप भी डॉक्टर इशरत की कमेटी में have been hundreds of meetings every week और बड़ी मेहनत हुई. Some or other चीज़ें dissipate होती हैं. तो my question is that is it basically the fault in design system through which we try to approach for revamping of this governance framework या on the way चीज़ें hijack हो गई? I mean, you have been part of all this long process. So how we can reposition ourselves एक नए खिदमत के नए जज्बे के साथ कि अब हम आगे क्या बेहतर करें so that we can do something very tangible which has an impact.
Dekhi ji, we've never taken reform seriously. Let's face facts. We've never, all these reports that I think Iram pointed out to, and we've looked at those reports, even Ishrat's reports, not a serious report, right? Too superficial. He wanted to maintain the same structure, just name PES, National Executive Service. No, I don't think it works. We need to reconstruct the system as a whole, period. Grade 17, 18, 19, all this has to go, BPS has to go, so many things have to be done. The problem is that there's no commitment from anywhere because this fiscal consolidation takes us over. But we have to run around looking for taxes. And besides, as I said, we don't have a policy framework in this country. We have the two-gap model, which is basically look for dollars, build projects. That's all we do. We have no reason to revamp our governance system. Our legal system, for example, take our legal system, which is all from the 19th century. We still don't have property rights in this country. The World Bank has given us tons of loans to digitize land records across the Punjab. We still haven't done it. It's been 30 years we haven't done it. I remember Systems Limited began this reform, this digitization, 1973. I was there when we talked about it. It was being done, but still hasn't been done. The question is, we get distracted by projects. We want to build the metro. We want to build universities. The projects take over. We don't do reform and policy because we don't think it's important. And the signal that we get from the world is, guys, don't worry about that. All that will take place. Doesn't matter. Just read Darren Nastimoglu and forget it. Just read North and forget it. The problem is projects and money. That mindset has to change. And we have to bring these guys, the whole population, into thinking policy and reform. There's no policy in this country. Name me one policy that exists. The policy that exists are all, give them subsidy, give them this. There's no policy. Education, where's the policy? Single national curriculum, that's all. So I think we really have to think. Stock market, as I said, we don't have a single market in the country. Has anybody thought about it? No. These are the key issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamtar, and I am Nadeem Ul-Haq. We are actually running out of time. If you people have any more questions, you can catch them during lunch. The other reform agenda today we have is fiscal, and I would request Derek H.C. Chen, Senior Economist, the World Bank, to present the fiscal reform agenda, and the title of his presentation is Restoring Pakistan's Fiscal Sustainability. Derek, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to need a handheld mic for my presentation. Thank you. This morning I'm going to go a little bit broader than the agenda and talk about both restoring Pakistan's fiscal sustainability. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yes, yes. So just to make sure, just a very quick recap of why we are here this morning. Right? First slide we're showing is Pakistan's fiscal deficit. As you can see, over time, it has been growing, right? In FY22, it was 7.9% of GDP, right? And the largest in 22 years. And we are forecasting for this fiscal year actually goes up to 8%, which could be the largest on record. Now, given that you have had deficits for such a long time, the average for the past 10 years was like 6.2%, right? It's persistent, it's large. What happens is that the losses, right, from each year accumulate to debt, public debt. And on the right-hand side, what we have shown is that what we're plotting is public debt and guaranteed debt as a share of GDP. And you can see it's persistently growing larger, right? Losses from each year accumulate into debt. Now, what is the big deal? Why are we worried about deficits? Why are we worried about debt? So deficits and the debt actually lead to imbalances in the rest of the economy. When the government spends a lot, right, aggregate demand goes up, economic growth goes up, and then the country imports a lot. But if you're not investing in the productive capacity of the economy, you can't really export, which means what you're doing is you're buying a lot from the rest of the world compared to what you're selling, right? So this leads to a trade deficit, and it shows up as a current account deficit. Again, we're buying a lot from the rest of the world, a lot more than what we're selling. So what you see is that the fiscal deficit tends to move together with the current account deficit. When you have a large current account deficit, you can't earn enough foreign currency to pay for the exports, then you lead into a shortage of foreign exchange. And this, you can't run out of foreign exchange, you have to implement cooling measures. So back to Matthew's presentation, where we show that the frequency of economic crisis tends to get closer and closer. You have more recurrent of this sort of boom-bust cycle. So all that is actually bad for the economy. Economic volatility is bad. Now, another angle to look at it is when you have so much deficit and you have so much debt, right? Where is the government borrowing from? A lot of it to finance the deficit is actually from the domestic banking sector, right? And what we have on the right-hand side actually shows the amount of government borrowing from the domestic banks. And you can see there's a clear upward trend, right? In FY23, almost 75, almost 3/4 of domestic banking credit is going to the government, right? But then what is left for the private sector? Only 1/4, right? So for Pakistan, on the left-hand side chart, you actually see the amount of credit going to the private sector. And when you compare it across other similar countries, you can see it's low on a cross-country comparison, right? Definitely it's quite low. What happens? When the private sector do not have that good access to credit, they cannot really invest. And lo and behold, on the right-hand side, you see that Pakistan's investment as a share of GDP is also low, right? So all this is that when you have a large persistent deficit, you have imbalances in the rest of the economy. When you have low investment, productivity is low, the productive capacity of the country cannot grow as fast. So this is why we are worried about deficits and debt. Now this morning, I'm just going to restrict my presentation to 2 ways in which we recommend decreasing the fiscal deficit. First is on revenues, right? And second is on expenditures. On the left-hand side, what we have plotted is total government revenue as a share of GDP over time. 2 points to take away is that from what we have in the latest is around 11.5% of GDP, total government revenue, right? What you take away from this chart is that it's actually low and actually pretty stagnant. There were times in Pakistan's history where the revenue to GDP ratio is higher. So more or less, what we're trying to do in terms of reforms hasn't really worked, right? Now, when you compare across the region, we also see that Pakistan's tax to revenue revenue to GDP is low compared to other South Asia countries. Let's go beyond that and look at across the world. Now, what we have down here is we tried to predict countries' tax to GDP ratio based on the fundamentals, the macro, the demography, and the institutional characteristics. If you are on this black line, it means that you're very close to your predicted value based on your fundamentals. And you can see that Pakistan is just a little bit higher than its predicted value, means that it's quite close to where it should be based on its macro, its demographics, and institutional characteristics. But another point to take away is that you see out of all these countries where Pakistan is situated, right? Its tax to GDP ratio is really one of the lowest in the world. Another reason why this could be, as we see as a contributing factor, is the cost of tax expenditures. What are tax expenditures? There are special rules, special in your tax code that gives preferential treatment to a special group of institutions or individuals or special activity. So these are those people or those activities with special rules that enables them to pay less taxes. Now what we have down here is just taking the tax expenditure statements compiled by FBR, right? Every year they have tax expenditure statements, and what do we see when we take all those special treatment that they give to all sorts of institutions in the economy, is that when you compute it across GDP, your tax expenditures actually went down until FY22, but then started going up again. Now, if you actually were to eliminate all these tax expenditures, your revenue to GDP could actually jump up by 2.7%, right? Which is substantial, given that you have somewhere like 11% right now. That would really be good. Now, according to the FBR, a large chunk of your tax expenditures actually comes from the sales tax. So what we have done, we actually use the data in FY19 to compute this. How much would Pakistan gain or the sales tax grow if we weeded out all the exemptions, all the concessionary rates, and all the zero ratings? So in FY19, the actual sales tax collected by the federal government was around 3.3% of GDP. Now, if we all reduce all those tax expenditures, the potential collection could go up to like 3.95. So an increase of like 0.5, 0.6% of GDP. So that's pretty significant. We made another calculation. At that time, what if you reduce the threshold? In FY19, the threshold was around like 5 million rupees per year. If you reduce it to 0, how much revenue could the sales tax collect? It will be around 6.5% of GDP. So those are large, So those are large things that the government could consider to improve tax collection. Another thing that we looked at was the tobacco excise. Now, the tobacco excise, how it is structured in Pakistan, at least currently, is that you have a cheap brand of cigarettes, right, in which one excise tax is levied on it. I think it's like 5.05 rupees per stick. And then you have the more premium brand, which the excise goes up to like, I think 16 rupees per stick or per pack. Now, what we have calculated here is that in FY19, in FY21, what was actually collected was like 0.2% of GDP, right? But potential, if you take account of all those people are consuming cigarettes, and if there's no leakage and everybody pays the excise, should have collected around 0.23, right? Now, with the reforms over the years where cigarette excise has been increased, in FY23, the potential for excise collection should jump up to like 0.73. Now, we made a recommendation that, you know, when you have 2 tiers of excise taxation, there's always the incentive for companies to try to pay the lower excise even when they're selling the more premium brand, right? Because it's cheaper, they pay lower excise. Now, if we were to eliminate that tiers, the 2 tiers, and only have one, and apply the single rate to all cigarettes, then the collection will jump up to 1.1% of GDP. So again, it's not insignificant. So these are 2 ways we suggest in terms of increasing revenues. Going to go very quickly about expenditures. Federal government spending largely is what we call quite rigid. It is, for federal, is around 14% of GDP. It's been quite stable over the past 10 years. Now, this is not particularly high when you compare cross-country, right, globally. The one thing that we notice is very characteristic is a large percentage of it is rigid. In a sense, it's pre-committed. More or less, you have to spend that amount of money unless you do deep reforms. So 2/3 or more than 2/3 about it is quite rigid. What are those rigid components? When you look at this side, you see a large part is your interest payments. Of course, you need to pay the interest payments on your debt. You do not want to default. Another large part comes from your subsidies, right? How much you're giving for subsidies in all sorts of areas. And the last one is actually your salaries and pensions, which we had the PIDE presentation talked on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about subsidies. Expenditure on subsidies over the years, it has been falling down. But recently, it's shot up, right? Now, what is so wrong about subsidies? You are trying to help the poor. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you give a universal or non-target subsidies, there are issues, there are leakages. So what we show here is an example of electricity subsidies. The height shows how much households are consuming electricity. And on the horizontal axis, we have done it by the income distribution, the poor and the rich. Takeaway is that, no-brainer, the rich households consume more electricity, right? So if when you give a subsidy, the rich households actually gain more. And when you look at, when we try to capture the benefits from electricity subsidies, let's say 2019, you do see that your poorest households, out of 1 rupee or 100 rupees being spent by the government, only 24 rupees goes to the poor households. The rest goes to your non-poor households. So in a sense, there's a leakage, there's a huge leakage. But the federal government has is aware of this, and they've been doing reforms. In 2022, together with the World Bank operation on PACE, they were actually changing the electricity subsidies. What happened? They did it in such a way that is less regressive. So comparing what we had to the new system in 2022, where the poor actually now gain more majority of the benefits, right? And the rich are still gaining, but much less. So that's a huge improvement. But where our point is that, to some extent, it could be even made better. So what we have down here are the benefits captured under BIS, the Conditional Cash Transfer Program. Now, BIS targeting system is actually very good, very precise, and you can see it here. In that, the poor, when a government spends 100 rupees on conditional cash transfers through BIS, they capture 81 rupees, right? Only 20% or 20 rupees are actually being wasted or leakages. The point is that if the government wanted to reduce poverty, they can actually take the money from subsidies, put it into BIS, and they will see a lot more effect in poverty alleviation. Or you want to do the same amount of poverty reduction, you can actually move from subsidies to BIS and get some savings, right? So that is the point about subsidies, that universal subsidies are not a good idea. Now, another point that we try to make, 2 minutes, okay. Another point that we try to make is on the structure of the federal government. Now, we know in the 18th Amendment, in 2010, a lot of ministries or a lot of functions of the government were devolved to the provinces. Things like health, education, social protection are supposed to be the responsibility of the provinces. However, when you look at the spending by the federal government, you see that before the 18th Amendment and in FY22, after the 18th Amendment, the part that is being spent on non-devolved functions is actually gone up, right? So the federal government, despite these roles going to the provinces, have maintained a slightly larger expenditure on these devolved functions. So this is the area that we think is a potential for the government to save money. Now, big picture. When you look at expenditures for the whole country, and you just look at the shares, the federal government spends about 2/3, the provinces spend about 1/3, right? Now, but due to the NFC, that was also done in 2010, a certain share of your revenues, 57.5% of your revenues, must go to the provinces. So, of all the revenues that's collected by Pakistan, federal government only keeps 46.1%, right? So they are responsible for a majority of the expenditures, but they don't keep most of the revenue, right? So what do you expect to happen in terms of the budget deficit? When you look at the budget deficit before the 18th Amendment, you can see it averaged 1.8%, and the primary deficit was smaller, 0.3. After the 18th Amendment, post-2010, when you look at the average, it's more than doubled. Same thing on the primary deficit. So here's the thing about, there's also, we think ways to tackle this. Also, we need to look more at the fiscal architecture of how the things are done. Okay, well, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. There's a response from PIDE. Mahmood Khalid, Senior Research Economist, will give a response to this presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Derek, for an excellent presentation. Thank you, PIDE and World Bank, for providing us the forum actually to engage on issues. And this is what our Vice Chancellor has earlier mentioned, that we want to develop a common agenda which has inclusivity in the sense of ownership of whatever we are recommending. Now, the discussion which we just had is quite large, so it's very difficult to sum it up in terms of some comments. But the good thing is that since PIDE has also been working on these issues, so we can give some our ideas on how we can actually improve what World Bank has been saying. Some things are common, which we have actually also identified in the write-up, that these are something which on PIDE also agrees. But specifically speaking on the taxation side, we have a bit of different opinion which we would like to share with the audience here, as well as we have done some write-up on that. So to start off with, when we talk about the fiscal side, actually it's the outcome. It's not the variable itself. So I'll start from the last discussion which we had on the subsidies. For example, the energy subsidies, what PIDE has been suggesting is to develop the energy market. It is going to take care of all the fiscal evils which are embedded in it. The problem with, say, agriculture subsidies can be done away with if the agriculture markets are developed. So just thinking about the fiscal variables from a fiscal perspective is not actually going to solve our crisis. And this is what Dr. Nayab has also mentioned earlier, that until unless you start off with the civil bureaucracy or the ones which are actually making the decisions or the whole system, we are never going to resolve this crisis. Just by looking at the end symptoms is not going to actually solve our problem. So this is what we have to understand. And specifically talking about the taxes, we believe that the obsession with the tax to GDP ratio actually has led to the FBR chasing a pursuit which is not justifiable in an economic sense. The World Bank report also mentioned the incidence of withholding taxes to be as high as 70%. So that means that the FBR is actually not collecting any revenue by themselves. It is the job which is done by the private agents. Why have they come to that? Because there is a pressure for them to maintain the tax to GDP ratio. Now, from where does this tax to GDP ratio actually comes? The FBR presents a forecast on an annual basis that what is the target which they are going to achieve based on the economic growth which is presented by the Planning Commission. Now, if there is some change in the growth, like we know that the targets are set higher, whereas the growth actually is lesser, the FBR is not allowed to reduce their targets. Although the forecasts are based on parameters, but the targets are set in absolute. So that results the FBR going into mini budgets and others. So as a comment, what we have noted is that actually we have not learned from the past. Tax has been on the reforms radar since inception, and more profoundly after the 90s. But what we have learned from all the reform process which has been done till that time is actually not included in the discussion or the report. This is what was missing from the outset. And PIDE has produced a book on it. Dr. Ikramul Haq actually contributed towards producing a very good book in terms of what we have learned from the experiences of the past. So based on that, what we believe is that tax to GDP ratio, comparing it across countries, is not the right way to look at the performance of our tax collecting authorities, because as the World Bank report themselves mentioned, that we are above the predicted value of the tax. So that means that we are already doing good. So why to then penalize the tax system to collect more, whereas they are already performing good in the sense of collecting taxes? So the problem is actually lying somewhere else. So it's not the rates, it's not the increasing in the potential taxes, rather it is the way the taxes are collecting. So this is what the PIDE strategy on taxes has been, to propose to simplify the taxes and make it more growth oriented rather than just based on the numbers. Now on the other side, since Derek has also presented some bits on the expenditures, this is what the fiscal is about. Taxes are collected on the benefit principles. If the society by and large doesn't agree on the fiscal side to be delivering them the required goods and services, they are not going to be willing to pay much. So we have a system now which is not performing in the sense of the service delivery, whereas the extraction is at the top over and above what is required. So this needs to be actually solved. And without that, we cannot think about having a sustainable fiscal platform. And fortunately, PIDE has also done work on the expenditure side as well. Like, for example, there was just a mention on doing the required public investment. But if you look at the public investment, you find out that most of the public investment is going into the projects which are not contributing. And some of you who are basically economists, if you look at the I-Cors, the rate of return on the investments, the public projects for which the funding is done are at the lowest or the bottom. So any investment which is going to be done through the PSDP does not necessarily lead to economic growth. So just saying that the taxes needs to increase so that we can facilitate more public investment is not going to resolve our economic crisis. So this is what we have to think about. Now, going in terms of specific tax proposals, without thinking about the economics of the proposals, it is going to be disaster. For example, increasing the property tax, since there is a gap which needs to be bridged without thinking that what is going to be the liquidity position for the ones which are going to pay the taxes. Is there some progressivity in that tax? What about the equity principle? And what about the other ills which are related to suddenly if something comes out? And as Dr. Nadeem has rightly mentioned, just for the pursuit of the taxes, we would find out deemed income, 7E, withholding taxes, taxes on a number of products which are practically not economic. Having transaction-based income withholding taxes actually kills the transaction itself. And on the trade side, almost 70% of our taxes are collected from the international trade. So that actually shows the pressure on the tax authorities of making bad policies rather than doing the policy in the right manner. So what PIDE believes is that if we develop the markets which are required for economic growth, that may actually leads to a second round impact in terms of having more returns. Like, for example, take the FBR rates. Mentioning that the FBR rates had been reevaluated and made at par with the market is not the solution. The problem actually lies in the real estate markets, and we need to develop that, and that is actually going to resolve our crisis in terms of true values for our taxes as well. So this is what needs to be done. Now, further moving on in terms of the thinking of reducing the taxable threshold for the income tax, this is something which PIDE really don't agree with. The report suggests that the salaried class should be having a lower income tax threshold because they think that it is going to bring us more revenue. Does not necessarily brings in, because if you look at the demographics, the lowest part actually contributes very less. This is the first element. Second, they might already be paying through their withholding taxes in the mobile cards and so many other things. Whatever taxes required from them has been paid. And lastly speaking, what they've mentioned in terms of the increase, reducing the top marginal income tax also does not necessarily is the right approach, because what we see on ground is that the corporatization does not happen because the people have an incentive to become a sole proprietor rather than going for corporatization. So reducing the top marginal income tax rate is actually not going to help us recover more resources. Rather, it is going to lead more de-corporatization. So this is what we don't agree with. And lastly speaking, on the federal excise duty imposition on a single rate, this is what PIDE has also produced as a research work, but we have added in it that the sugary sweetened beverages should also be added because it's a kind of a public health nuisance, and this is what needs to be produced. So at the end, we agree with many of the good proposals which has been presented in the report, but still on the taxation side and somewhat on the expenditure side, lot needs to be added to it, because without that, we would not have a complete reforms agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Behmood Saab. I'll request Derek Chen to please come on the stage for a question answer session. Again, we'll try to take 3 questions each round. Try to be short, relevant, and to the point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is Nasser. So, Dr. Khalid already mentioned a lot of points related to the. When I just raised one point, when you thought about the rigidity of the expenditure, you know, this narrative basically gives you a wrong approach because it misses the underlying phenomena why there is rigidity. The number of ministries, number of departments, number of like these events that cause these rigidities. So how we can solve? So first we have to go for that what Dr. Nadeem already mentioned, that unless we go for that type of reform, so we can observe that and then so there is no space for expenditure rationalization. That's what you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We fully agree. The part about bringing up high share of rigidity is to mean that the share of discretionary expenditure is small. So in order to rebalance your fiscal deficit, you need to look at the rigid parts, which requires reforms, right? It's just can't be. We know many governments do that. They squeeze capital expenditure whenever they have a fiscal deficit. This is not just for Pakistan. Most countries do that, right? But given if your discretionary or your capital expenditure is already so small, you have difficulty squeezing. So that's the point. We fully agree.
Hello, my name is Asif, and I'm a student of Development Studies at PIDE. So what you presented about NFC, the pre and post comparison of fiscal deficits, and I have a few comments about that. So the first one is that what goes to provinces in the form of tax revenues is actually the tax revenue and not the non-tax revenues which are kept by the federal government. And number two, tax is a function of tax base. So if you reverse the base, you will see the provinces actually collecting most of the taxes instead of the federal government. Let's say if we reverse the tax base for sales tax, right? And the third is that NFC was with great deliberation, and the comparison of pre and post NFC position in terms of fiscal deficit is fallacious.
So the point about bringing up the NFC, we are not giving any indication whether it's good, bad. It's just an observation, right? Right now, there's what we call fiscal asymmetry, where the federal government spends a lot but keeps less of the revenue. And that's why the fiscal deficit has grown past 2010. So we are just making the observation that this is not sustainable. Something needs to change. So how that change comes about, because it involves the constitution, is up to you as a Pakistani, right? But we are just making the observation that this is not sustainable to continue. Thanks.
Devolution of the fiscal devolution at grassroots level, district government, and lack of that strategic thrust resulted this kind of fiscal deficit?
No, I think sorry, can you repeat your question?
My question is that there is, as Dr. Naab already mentioned, that local government is the fruition of the democracy lies in the district governments, and there is a lack of strategic thrust for institutionalizing district governance. And is it that way why we are not more emphasizing on fiscal financial devolution at the grassroots level? And this may be one of the reasons that we are growing the fiscal deficit at the federation level.
We haven't really looked.
Because people have not experienced actually the benefit of the district governments. So when people not have an experience, then they cannot change the mindset of that, how important is the district government is.
So we haven't looked down to the district government yet, right? What we brought up
that's the most important area. That is what, I mean, the cumulative effect of the district governance will be finally have a positive impact at the provincial and the federation level.
So, at least in the district, okay.
If you just see the history of martial law in Pakistan, all the martial laws were successful in terms of economic development because of the district governments. One mentioned by Dr. Nair during the regime of the Musharraf also.
So our study doesn't actually go on to district governments, but that being said, drawing from cross-country experience, there is many countries that decided to decentralize to district provincial governance to aid service delivery, right? In that sense, if those things are done well, you could see human capital going up, and that could be good for the country. So in what you're saying, we don't disagree with it from that in the sense of a potential growth for the economy. Right now, we were more focused on the fiscal deficit and actually how to resolve that issue, right? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Derek, for your analytical and thought-provoking talk. Well, I just want to talk about that boom and bust cycle that we frequently experience in our economy. You have alluded to a phenomena that whenever the growth trajectory touches a certain point, it always results into a current account deficit afterwards. And we are not yet out of it. So how to make our economy sustainable and overcome this challenge? Thank you.
So, yes, so the boom and bust cycle is actually a result of the economy not producing enough. If you are able to produce enough to match what you actually need to buy from the rest of the world, you can solve that problem, right? So that's why a lot of our analysis does, at the same time, while we're worrying about how to stabilize this fiscal deficit, we also emphasize a lot, as in PIDE, on investments, both physical investment as well as human capital investment, right? But beyond that, it's also on exports, right? Where literature shows, and East Asian economies also show, export-led strategy helps you to build human capital, because when you can sell to the rest of the world, you learn how to do it better, right? And that improves the productive capacity of your economy. So that, it requires a two-pronged approach, making sure that you stabilize the crisis, don't get into too much trouble with your external sector, but at the same time, it needs to be more forward-looking to focus on investments and exports.
Sir, I have two questions. My first question is on salaries. IMF and World Bank has proposed to reduce or rationalize the slabs from 7 to 4. If it's done, then the middle income salaried class taxes will be increased. So what is the exact proposal of the World Bank? And my second question is on tobacco. You have mentioned the one-tier system or premium rates applicable to all. Does the World Bank know that in Pakistan, the share of illicit, which doesn't agree with the PIDE and other research institutions as well, it's more than 50%. So what is the solution of this untaxed cigarette? And they are the more powerful people in Pakistan. Thank you.
I won't comment on the public sector study because I was not involved in that, but more on the excise tax situation. So how we came up with the potential is actually trying to get information from the household survey, looking at how much people consume in terms of tobacco, and then working backwards from there. If everyone paid taxes, what it's supposed to be. So what we're highlighting down here is in terms of the structure of the excises, where we think that people, even if you're legitimate, could go from selling premium cigarettes and pay a lower excise, right? So, but concurrently with that, you do have your tax and trade system where you're trying to squeeze on illicit cigarettes. Before this, I was in Indonesia. Tobacco taxation is actually the third largest revenue stream for Indonesia. So we could understand a bit more, how is it done in Indonesia? Why is there less leakages there compared to Pakistan? This is something that we are trying to do, is in progress. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Any more questions, you can catch him during lunch. Our next reform agenda is regarding regulations. So we have Ahmed Waqar Qasim, Senior Research Economist from PIDE, and the title of his presentation is Rationalizing Regulations for an Open and Competitive Economy.
Well, we have talked a lot about tax to GDP ratio, but I would like to divert your attention to another important ratio, that is investment and to GDP ratio. Well, as we all know that investment has been widely recognized as a potent variable for economic growth, and it provides the fuel to propels businesses forward, facilitates innovations, and enhances productivity. Experiences have shown that sustained level of investment is necessary for maintaining long-term economic growth and competitiveness. However, if we look at Pakistan, the performance of tax to GDP ratio falls short compared to our neighboring country. And this low ratio that at 15% present a hurdle to achieve sustained economic growth. Both, if we look at our demography and debt sustainability, both demands that Pakistan must grow at a rate higher than 8%. But if we look at our current incremental capital output ratio, to attain a 8% growth rate, this ratio must be 28.8%. No question that comes to mind is that what is constraining in this investment in Pakistan? I think you need not to be an analyst to realize that the business or socio-economic environment in Pakistan is not investment friendly. And the regulations is the main hurdle in improving the investment ratio in Pakistan. Doing business in Pakistan presents a lot of challenges which involve lengthy official approvals, unjustified procedures, and inconsistent policies. Without improving investment climate, the prospect to enhance the domestic investment, let alone attracting the foreign investment, appears dismal. Now, if we rank the investment constraining factors in Pakistan, I think the regulatory burden must be among the top. Our regulations, again, is not business friendly. This is mainly because our regulatory framework is outdated and inefficient. There is a study at PIDE which indicates that why our regulatory framework is inefficient. Our regulators often exhibit tendency that limited or very low understanding of markets and the role of regulations. So this is the main reasons. That's why the regulatory quality index of WorldBank rightly presents a concerning pictures. This index actually captures the ability of a government to formulate and implement effectively policies and regulations that support private sector growth. Pakistan performance compared to other countries is very poor, and which, in fact, except for Bangladesh, all other countries outperformed Pakistan, which indicates that their regulatory framework is more favorable for private sector growth. It seems that we have developed a never-ending desire to regulate and control the market. This graph illustrates that over the last decades, the number of regulation, licenses, registration, and other regulatory burdens have been doubled. In essence, we have increased the regulatory burden on the private sector significantly in the name of market development, provision of protections, consumer protections, safety, and equity. So this continuous creation of regulations and regulatory bodies has led us to a point where operating informally appears to be a more economically rational decision than operating formally. And here is a sector-wise breakdown of our regulatory burden based on the Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative repositories. But at PIDE, we believe that the actual number of regulatory burden is higher than the depicted ones. The point to be noted here is that the sectors which have the highest regulatory burden tend to exhibit the higher incidence of informality. For example, look at the wholesale and retail trade sector, which has the highest number of licensees, registers the highest number of informal entities as reported by the State of Commerce report of PIDE. And here comes another evidence which is widely quoted, the PIDE slide series. This series revealed that how we are overly bureaucratic and how we are business unfriendly. The investment and GDP ratio is low because taking any economic activity involves an extensive sluggish paper-based approvals which often take years. And because of this sluggish process, businesses are disheartening and they are moving out of country or they reduce growth. And it is no wonder why the firms are stunted and the the stock exchange market is shrinking. I think the regulatory framework of Pakistan is a classical example of regulatory failure. And government tried to address this failure by making more regulation instead of addressing the underlying reasons. As I mentioned that there is a study at PIDE which mentioned there are three key reasons or main reasons for regulatory failure. Number one is that our regulation, our regulatory compliance is high because of complex regulatory mechanism or regulatory framework. Number two is the use of regulation for private gains instead of making our developing markets. And the number three reason is that there is a limited or lack of knowledge related to the cost and related to the demand and cost structure of the industry. At PIDE, we have measured at the federal level, we have more than 122 regulatory bodies, and government is creating regulatory bodies, and we are hearing that there is a bill that there will be an e-regulatory bodies which will regulate the e-commerce. And the cost of, hidden cost of regulation is huge. And reform failure has placed the entire economy at a greater risk. I think Pakistan has not learned from the development experience of other economies. And our government still seeks to control the behavior of economic agents. If Pakistan wants to grow, we need to focus on investment to GDP ratio. And to attract both domestic as well as foreign investment, what is required is a deep deregulations. We need to liberalize our markets. But if we look at the current structure of our markets, the key player is the government. The footprint is the government is more than 64% in the GDP. So markets only functions if the rules of the game are well defined and effectively implemented. What we need are clear rules that ensures the exchange of information and exchange of rights, which are the key fundamental elements of the markets, are efficiently in place. And therefore, we have to streamline our regulatory framework, and we have to do away from permissions. What we are proposing is that define clear rules and go away with permissions. To move forward and to end permission-stan, and which Pakistan has become, and to modernize our regulatory framework, there are two options. The first option is two approaches. The first approach is piecemeal approach or bottom-up approach, which Pakistan has been trying since last decade. And experiences have shown that economies like Pakistan, which saturated, which have a lot of regulations, this approach will not work. The other approach and most promising one is regulatory approach, which Dr. Nadeem has already talked about. And at PIDE, we advocate that Pakistan must adopt the regulatory guillotine approach. And there are many success stories like Hungary, Mexico, South Korea, and UAE, who have adopted this approach to modernize their regulatory framework. So Pakistan also needs to adopt this regulatory approach. What is regulatory guillotine strategy? It is basically a bold strategy to rapidly cut down outdated and cumbersome regulations. The strategy based on a default assumption that all the regulations will be eliminated unless the regulatory authority provide a clear justification based on some kind of argument, mostly cost-benefit analysis, for retaining the regulations. So what we are proposing is that the cabinet should do a regulatory review, a systematic review, within a set time frame, let's say 3 months, and ask all regulatory bodies to justify the retention of any kind of regulations. So after 3 months, only those regulations will be retained, though that have clear cost-benefit background behind them. Besides modernizing our regulatory framework, we also need to control the flow of regulations. For that, PIDE is proposing a regulatory impact analysis approach. And this regulatory impact analysis must be based on these considerations which are in the slides. In fact, what we are proposing is that we need a Pakistani equivalent of Office of Management and Budget and the Paper Reduction Acts. We need decisive actions in two aspects. The first one is to modernize our regulatory framework through regulatory guillotine strategy, and the second is to control the flow of regulations through reform impact assessments. And since this regulatory modernization initiative is not possible without a strong political support, and here we are recommending that the Planning Commission can take the role, a leading role, and drive this initiative. If we modernize, as Mehtab asked that, what would be the short-term solutions? This can be one of the short-term solutions. If we modernize our regulatory framework, then the benefits are beyond just market developments. At PIDE, we try to estimate the benefits of regulatory modernizations by assuming that the sludge in identified sectors eliminated. By using the input, output, and forward linkages, here is some our estimation results. The results shows that we can get an initial boost of 3.9% of GDP if we modernize our regulation in the first round. And this figure increased to 4.1 to 4.3% in the second and third round, respectively. Besides economic growth, regulatory modernization also brings us 2 million new jobs in the economy, as well as it will increase our investment to GDP ratio by equivalent to 1.6% of GDP. So here is a breakdown, further breakdown. If we look at the investment, we can increase our investment to GDP ratio to 8.5%, besides the IMF projections, if we modernize our regulatory framework, as well as we can create 2 million more jobs, and our potential economic growth will be 9.4%, alongside the projected IMF growth. So what we are proposing is that regulatory modernization can take us to a higher growth trajectory if implemented effectively. Of course, this demands a meticulous planning, stakeholder involvement, and a steadfast commitment by the leadership or political leaderships. So I would like to end with a humble submission that we have to end Permissionistan, which Pakistan has become. Let people work and invest without being the fear of labeled as cheaters or frauds. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ahmed Vakar. We have comments on the presentation by Tobias Huck, lead country economist from the World Bank.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I thought that was an excellent presentation from PIDE, and I don't think there's much there that we would disagree with. I think very empirical, very sharp, and some very good examples. I think that the problem is very clear. We have a proliferation of regulatory agencies, literally hundreds of regulatory agencies. We have hundreds of laws, some dating back, somebody just pointed out to me, the Factories Act of 1934 still governs the operations of factories in Pakistan. We have an Investment Act that legally precludes foreign investment in sectors unless there is no domestic activity occurring. We have a system in which there are city-level municipal authorities issuing hundreds of different permit types, including for activities such as selling fruit. In this kind of regulatory morass, it's impossible not only for firms to comply, but firms to even know what they're supposed to be complying with. And it's very clear that this is having a major impact on investment in Pakistan. And so I just wanted to make two real points here to add to the very good points already made by PIDE. The first is that the regulatory problems, this microeconomic problems around the regulatory, really are the foundation of some of the macroeconomic problems that Pakistan is facing as well. We have a situation in which any time the economy grows, we end up with increasing imports, stagnant exports, a balance of payments crisis. Why is that? Why does that happen? It's because growth in Pakistan's economy goes to consumption and imports rather than into investment that would expand the productive potential of the economy. For as long as there are these disincentives to investment, we are going to see this periodic cyclical crises. We're going to see Pakistan limp along at growth rates that are completely inadequate to achieve the type of poverty reduction and growth that we need. So yes, regulations are a problem for business. Regulations are a problem for business people, for employment. But they're also a real constraint to the type of productivity improvements, competitiveness that Pakistan needs to achieve if it's going to get out of this cycle of macroeconomic crises. So all of these things fit together. The fiscal discussion that we've been having really is the other side of the regulatory discussion we've been having, and we need to address both of these challenges at once. And one data point that I just wanted to point out here, foreign direct investment into Pakistan, around 1% of GDP. That compares to 15, 20% in Southeast Asian countries, where the investment environment is conducive, where it's attractive to foreign investment, where you can mobilize international capital to fill your investment gap, and realize some of the real potential of integration into global supply chains, global production, export opportunities. So unless we address the regulatory constraints, we're not going to attract the domestic investment, we're not going to attract the foreign investment, we're going to continue to have these major constraints to competitiveness, and with that, it's very hard to see how Pakistan moves towards sustainable growth. What to do? I mean, I think exactly PIDE's recommendations, they make so much sense, we would fully endorse them. I think that it's important to consider the political constraints that we're facing here. I think it's very hard for government agencies to give up areas where they have control. There is a political economy dynamic here, and that really has fed into the way we've approached reforms in the past and what we would recommend in the future. So through the BOI, the Board of Investment, we managed to achieve quite rapid progress in simplifying some of the business regulatory constraints through the Doing Business initiative, where we saw Pakistan move from 149th to 108th in a very short period of time. But that's still 108th of, I think, about 180 countries covered in that index. So Pakistan really still towards the bottom of that distribution. But what we did learn from that experience is that rapid progress is possible if there is strong political ownership, if there is a process that coordinates between the provincial and the federal level and has them working together, and if there is a process that brings in the voice of the private sector to guide and inform the decisions about what can be simplified, what can be cut, and what the binding constraints are that should be addressed first. So that would be our recommendation for the way forward. We're working on this, on the PRMI with the government. We have a new project in place, the DEEP project, which is providing substantial technical assistance to that process. But we're at the very early stages, and it's by no means certain that success is ensured. For this to achieve success, we need quick wins. We need to show that this time it's credible, that this time it's different, and we need to have a broad political consensus on the need for deep reform. So first step is mapping the regulatory environment. The second step is cutting everything that can be cut, removing everything that's redundant. And the third step is digitizing and unifying systems so that firms that can and want to comply find it easy to do so. We will need an agency set up that's empowered to do that. We need to make sure that whether that sits under the planning department, wherever that sits, there is a unified agency with responsibility for that initiative across federal and provincial governments so that it has the political weight to cut through the vested interests, to cut through the constraints that have impeded progress in the past. With that kind of regulatory delivery office mentality set up, accountable, small, highly empowered office with the legal authority that is needed, we really think we could see some progress here. Let me stop my remarks at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tobias. Ahmed Bakar, please come on the stage for the question answer session. Try to be short, relevant, and to the point. Questions, please raise your hands.
Well, before we start, you mentioned the improvements on the ease of doing business. I would like to take the comments from the person behind this improvement, who has been working for 25 years on the reform. Mukarram Saab, please, can you join us?
Thank you very much. A very, very interesting session that I came for specially, and wonderful presentation, and a lot of things that needed to be said have been said by Tobias. So we all agree that there should be ease of doing business. I've been, as a civil servant, so I present that part, why doesn't it actually happen? When everybody says, when the academia says, when the media says, when the businesses say, when the politicians say that we should have ease of business, why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it happen? What stops it? So for example, the DEEP project that we're talking about, I was at BOI, and 2 years ago we prepared the DEEP project, and it's taken us 2 years just to approve the project. So if it takes 2 years to, and the DEEP component which deals with ease of doing business has not been changed at all. So it is the same thing that was stuck in the works for 2 years. And I would disagree with having this initiative sit in any institution to make it work. The ease of doing business that we were able to accomplish were accomplished only when the Prime Minister was directly steering it. In India, it was the Prime Minister who had a shout of end of license Raj. And the Prime Minister drove it, and it happened. Why doesn't it happen? Because there are beneficiaries of this regulatory environment. And it starts from the top. So the ministers who have departments of regulations under them have people approach them for favors of regulatory permissions. So a lot of powers that ministers derive are from the regulations that are in place. And below the ministers are the government departments, in which again the regulatory permissions, NOCs, licenses give them their power. And below the senior management, there is the operational management, which is there forever. Factories department, labor department, social security department, they know. And below that is a hidden layer. That hidden layer is the intermediaries. Those accountants, those lawyers, those consultants whose bread and butter depends on regulatory difficulties. And behind them are hidden certain businesses who have created these barriers to entry. So if it is very difficult to get a pharmaceutical manufacturing license, guess what happens? The market share remains with the people who already have permission. Would they like new entrants? No, they would not like new entrants. So if you really want to make it happen, you have to realize that there are people in the market who want to have entry barriers. There are intermediaries who want to have these regulation in place. There are civil servants who drive their powers from their regulations. And there are ministers who can give favors to their supporters for these permissions and licenses. I've been working in regulatory reforms for 22 years, and I have paid the price again and again. So the easiest way to sabotage any initiative is to change the person. So if somebody is creating a lot of disruptions, get him moved to a better position, some other position, so that it is sabotaged. So this is what's been happening. Dr. Nadeemul Haq, who's sitting here, has been crying hoarse about deregulation for many years. I've personally worked with him. There was one regulation which was just about having similar food standards across the country. It took us 2 years after the approval of the Council of Common Interest, which is the highest constitutional body in Pakistan, headed by the Prime Minister, and all the chief ministers sit in together. It made a decision, and the implementation of that decision took 2 years to happen. So this is what the road is like. It's all very nice to say that this should be done, this can be done, we've made some progress, etc., etc., etc. But as a veteran of a quarter of a century, since 2001, I've been 23 years, I've been working in reforms. I tell you, it's uphill up all the way. The stakes are so high that those who benefit from these regulations will go to any extent. They will go to any extent to not make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now the floor is open for questions. By the way, sir, due to disruptions, you were awarded the most disruptive civil servant by the World Economic Forum, and you are paying the price. So the floor is open for the questions.
Assalamualaikum ji. Thank you. My question is regarding the ease of doing business ranking. Why are we still wanting to pursue it? It's a failed concept, it's had its problems. Why do we not focus on the underlying issues that cause issues with companies setting up and working? Why do we want to improve our ranking only and go from number 58 to 24, for example, or something? Russia tried it and they didn't do too well.
I think we are not pursuing improvements in the ease of doing business. Our point is very simple. Our point is that we need to modernize our regulatory systems. So, but I think you are diverting your question to Tobias. Okay.
Maybe I can just reply very briefly. The Doing Business Index is no longer being prepared. We're moving towards a new report, which is called Be Ready, and that is a much more in-depth analysis, and it really is trying to focus on the lived experience of firms rather than formal compliance with specific indicators. So just to finish, I mean, I think the Doing Business indicator will no longer be the index by which we're tracking progress.
A question from the back.
Yes. Yeah. My name is Mudassir Hussain. I've spent a good fair amount of time as a technocrat in the government, telecom, tech sector, currently with Jazz. So a specific question and a generic one too. Tobias, we keep hearing a deep project. If there is something so sweeping coming up, why does the industry, the public, not know what the component of this is? What I gather here is that regulatory impact assessment should be the basis, improving regulations, fine, I've spent a fair amount of time over there. What you see is you propose a new body at the Planning Commission to regulate the regulators, you know, in simple words. So how do you think will that help? And what is most of the time what our issue is, after having gone through this, is that we want to set up an evaluation criteria and a performance criteria, but we don't know exactly what we're looking for. So who for different regulators will this set up? Because technology has a direct interest and impact from the regulation it faces today. And we see that technology is the basis of transformation for everything we see here. So what exactly is the component that we are proposing? Coming to specific, we've talked abstract for quite a long while. Now we should get into the core of the business. So if you would want to respond, any one of you, it's welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I prepared the business component of the DEEP project. DEEP project has multiple components. The business component, I will say it very simply. I will not go into any technicality. What we want from DEEP is a business portal. And what would that business portal do? You log on to it, you say, I want to set up a restaurant in Sheikhupura. What approvals do I need? So it will tell you that these are the approvals, these are the documents, these are the fees. Online, you submit the documents, your national identity card or something, and online you submit the fee, and you get your licenses done from that. It's not something extraordinary. If you go to certain developed, highly developed countries in the world, they have these kind of single window which allows you to do business and set up these things. And apart from only those dangerous industries or highly sensitive industries which have an impact on health, like pharmaceutical, or food industry where you're doing food manufacturing, or some environmental industry where there are issues about environment and pollution, etc., you will not be requiring approvals. You'll be just requiring to submit your information and be allowed to work. There is also another component which is called zero time to startup. So this is the basic idea, that we set up a portal which is connected to municipal, provincial, and federal regulators, and it serves as a single window for business setup. I hope that clarifies what DEEP would do when it's done. Thank you.
Well, question? Yes. It's really nice to be here and hear a lot about reforms. The one point that which all agree here, I think, there is an inbuilt resistance from the lower level to the top, okay? Now, I haven't come across in these meetings that for each of the reforms, what about a resistance strategy? I mean, a strategy to overcome resistance. Let's suppose there is a reform A, and this is, I mean, one should say, Department A will have the highest resistance, Department B will have the lowest resistance, and how does one overcome that? What is the strategy to overcome? Because in the end, what is happening here in the last 20 years, I mean, these reforms can be seen in any of the World Bank book or now with PIDE also, okay? But there is complete resistance. And that there has to be a strategy to overcome the resistance. And I didn't see that here. Okay, thanks.
Please.
All right, my question is from the World Bank representative. My name is Naushidullah Shah, and I'm an architect, urban designer, academician, a traveler, working in Peshawar since 24 years. I've graduated from an art school, so I've got that, thoughts with me. I belong to a tribal area that is Miran Shah, North Waziristan. I'm the chief of Tapizat Tower 2, so I've got a responsibility. My question is regarding the masters of Pakistan, which are the people. And the, the bureaucracy, which is they call it the servant, the civil servants. So what is, to bring in, strengthen up the society or the people, we need to actually, being an architect, I see that we need to bring change in the ambience and in the infrastructure and in those projects so that it gives awareness to the people to strengthen it up. I've experienced it, like, for example, Florence was the city that when I entered, I came to know that those ambience and those architects were the leading that bring in those renaissance, right? So what is the World Bank policy for creating such opportunities like regenerating cities with their ambience and with their economic, development? So do you have any plans for that too? Are you considering it the architectural development or the open spaces? Thank you so much.
So let me respond to these resistance questions. I would like to reiterate Dr. Naab's answer to the similar question, that although we do acknowledge that there is a resistance to change, the status quo will remain unless there is a public demand. Since PIDE is a public think tank, and what we are trying to do is to create the demand of reform. We want the public to discuss these ideas, these issues, and what is the potential way. So unless there is a public demand, there will be no reforms. To the second answer, second question.
Maybe I can just respond a little bit to a few of the points that have been raised. I mean, I think when it comes to deep and what's going to be different this time, I'm going to be very honest. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be different this time. I think what we see at the moment is that Pakistan is at a moment where we really need to see some change. We need to see some dramatic reform. What the World Bank is doing through the DEEP project is we're providing some support for technical systems, and we're providing some technical assistance and technical advice on how you can do regulatory reform. We've been working with the Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI, and our hope is that that will get the political backing that it needs to drive through these reforms. And as I said, the process that we're supporting is a mapping of those reforms. It's then going through and saying, what of those reforms can we cut away? What can we just get rid of because it's duplicative or unnecessary? And of the reform, of the regulations that are left, of the regulations that we do need, just as Buhari was saying, like, how do we digitize them? How do we create systems so that they can be utilized and accessed by firms in the most easy and accessible way possible? That's not something that the World Bank can do by itself. There's no doubt about that. That requires strong political leadership. It requires the provincial and federal governments to work together. It probably requires top-level government commitment, doing some very difficult political things. I think our hope is that this might now be the moment for that to happen, given that Pakistan has been facing a very difficult economic situation for a very long time. And I think everyone in this room almost agrees that we're not going to fix Pakistan's macro challenges. We're not going to escape from reliance on the IMF. We're not going to escape from having an inadequate tax take, insufficient resources to deliver public services, unless we get investment, right? So that's our hope. The need of the hour is increased investment. Reforming the business enabling environment is critical for that. That will require political leadership and a real sense of urgency that we've frankly been lacking for a little while. On the specific question about how the World Bank engages in communities and develops areas, regional development strategy, I mean, the way the World Bank works is always through government. And what we've been doing, for example, recently in the recently emerged areas, for example, through our governance performance projects, we've been trying to establish the revenue systems and the public expenditure systems that mean that the provincial government is better equipped to raise revenue, the government is better equipped to establish state presence, the government is better equipped to deliver services in those areas. The way we do that is constantly through the government. They are the decision makers. We are there to finance. We are there to advise. And our hope, of course, is that government is doing that in a way that's as responsive to the needs of the community as it should be.
Well, thank you, Tobias, for excellent comments. Well, if both of you agree that to modernize the regulatory framework, regulatory gluten is the best strategy, then I have a small concern, and we will discuss it later on, that if the regulatory gluten is the best strategy, then why would we need mapping at the first stage? Because in my understanding, we don't need mapping, and we will end this session here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ahmed Bakar, Tobias, and Mukarram Saab. Thank you very much for this very insightful discussion. I know many of you have questions. Catch them at lunchtime. Next, we have actually the last session of the day, public spending on human capital, very important reform agenda. Maliha Heather, education specialist for the World Bank, will be presenting. I would request her to please come on the stage. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to present to you today the key messages of the Public Expenditure Review prepared by the World Bank Pakistan Education Team. I would like to acknowledge the hard work and rigorous research of the authors who are not present here today, but this report was led and authored by World Bank senior economist Juan Baron and his co-authors Mary Ben, Fahad Mirza, Nimra Afzal, Hirut Wolde, and Nadeem Hussain. So let me start with giving you a very brief overview of the education landscape, as I know this is a complete shift from the conversation that we've been having so far. So over the last few decades, Pakistan has made great strides in strengthening its education system. If we look at female enrollment in schools at the primary level, we went up from 65% in 2011 to 77% in 2021. Similarly, secondary enrollment of girls alone from 26% in 2011 went up to 38% in 2021. I mean, these are not great numbers, but there's an improvement that we saw. Pakistan introduced innovative reforms to support the expansion of the system and improve teaching by bringing in merit-based recruitment of teachers and the strategic use of public-private partnerships. Now, these reforms have been underpinned by a significant increase in the availability of data and the participation of civil society organizations promoting transparency and inclusivity in education. But despite progress, big challenges still remain. And here I would like to take you through some of the big challenges in education. Let me introduce you to the concept of learning poverty. Some of you may be familiar, but learning poverty for any population is the share of 10-year-olds who cannot read an age-appropriate text. The learning poverty in Pakistan is 77%. You can see a comparison with similar countries. And then I just want to point out that the taller the graph is, the worse the situation is, right? Learning poverty is a share of, as I said, 10-year-olds who cannot read, who are enrolled in school, plus the out-of-school children, the children who are not enrolled in school. The Pakistan government recently released a number of 26.2 million children out of school today in Pakistan. Plus, add to that, 65% of the children who do go to school still cannot read an age-appropriate text by the age of 10. So how can public spending improve these issues? So for the purpose of today's discussion, I would like to focus on the key challenges in spending in the education sector. First of all, efficiency. Pakistan needs to spend better on education. There's always this debate about whether we need more or whether we need better. So definitely Pakistan needs to spend better on education. The current spending fails to secure quality and access at par with countries, mainly in part due to misallocation of resources. Adequacy, Pakistan does need to spend more on education. The low allocation contributes to the high dropout that we see, to the learning poverty, and to the reduced human capital, and hence stunted economic growth. Equity, that's another challenge in public spending on education. Inequalities are reinforced by these funding allocations, which mainly affect children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Management and coordination, so sector management for each provinces of the education sector, even after a decade of devolution, and as we saw in the conversations today, we see many challenges at the middle district level as well, some of which include inefficient teacher deployment or duplication of roles. Finally, the involvement of parents and civil society, currently that it's almost non-existent, the involvement of the actual stakeholders in the budget-making process. Now, I'm going to go through these messages, these key messages of this public expenditure review. I'll go through these messages one by one, just to walk you through with some of the recommendations that we have. So, the biggest efficiency gain that we can see is spending more on teachers, improving teacher effectiveness. Why teachers? If you look at the provincial budget or the federal budget for the education sector, 90% of the recurrent budget goes to salaries. So that's the biggest efficiency gain that we can see. So some of the other recommendations in improving efficiency in education, firstly, by improving teacher practices, definitely, that would bolster system efficiency. By improving student outcomes, better teachers lead to better students' learning. Enhancing learning requires embracing teaching methods and programs proven to yield results. So in the past, we've had, as I mentioned before, there have been significant strides. There have been pockets of programs in different areas in Pakistan. For example, the USAID brought this Pakistan Reading Project in different districts and different areas, which resulted in a significant improvement in students' learning level, in reading levels. There's another concept of teaching at the right level, where teachers are given structured training to teach at the level of what the student can receive and learn at that level. Then there's continuous professional development. Teachers need continuous trainings, etc., and language of instruction and parenting practices, etc. So these have been experimented across Pakistan in different pockets. But the challenge now is to go to scale with these, right? And that's why we need more money for education. When we say Pakistan needs to spend more, is how to go to scale. Then there are other factors for efficiency, that there's financing and budgeting, targeting per the sector plans of different provinces, and timely release of funds. We had some conversations on district level management. So allocation authority at the district, at the service delivery level is also very, very important. So spending more on education, the country we establish has a low allocation for education. Pakistan currently spends about 1.7% of the GDP. The data that we have here for the purpose of consistency is from 2020. But based on statistical modeling and analysis, Pakistan needs to spend at least 4.3% of GDP needs to be allocated towards education. So here we established that Pakistan cannot deliver free and compulsory education without additional funding. The government must invest between 4.3% to 5.1%. There's a range based on the modeling that we did. So an annually agreed upon increases in overall budget could help set Pakistan on track. So we're not saying that immediately increase this allocation or the portion of GDP, but this needs to be incrementally done. And to increase education expenditure, the country needs to bolster government revenues. And I will not speak more on that because we've been mulling over this idea all morning already. So what could be the allocation priorities when we look at increasing funding for education? So we still say that even though we say that Pakistan needs to spend more on education, Pakistan needs to spend more efficiently in some of the areas proposed here. We continue to strengthen the public sector with well-prepared teachers. enhance public-private partnerships by, guided by robust regulations and strong enforcement of salaries of teachers. Public-private partnerships in different provinces have proven to increase enrollment. However, more regulations need to be brought in place in terms of teacher salaries, because those was something that in these private sectors were not considered at par. Optimize the current infrastructure. There can be double shifts, there can be summer camps. So using the current infrastructure, because one of the main issues in access to education is that Pakistan has a lot of primary schools, but not enough secondary schools, public secondary schools for children to go to. And finally, I'll mention ECE, which is early childhood education, preparing students to come to school. So the World Development Report of 2018 argues about student preparedness, readiness to come to school, to primary schools. So by recruiting and training new early childhood education, which is the pre-primary level teachers, and defining sustainable program modalities, and strengthening the regulation around that as well. The next message on equity. So low inefficient spending has led to inequitable provision of key education services for some populations, which, as I mentioned before, are the marginalized children from poor backgrounds, from rural areas. So Pakistan can boost equity by using data to create targeted initiatives and incentives, targeting those lagging districts and areas with the kind of interventions that are needed most in those areas. Adopting an inclusive approach in its budget process, which means including parents and community before preparing budgets, and presenting these budgets in a citizen-friendly format that could foster public understanding and spotlight areas where funds can be directed for maximum impact. So along with addressing disparities in expenditure per child, some of the recommendations are that by establishing these targets and monitoring to reduce these differences, there can be clear formulas that are anchored in data and principles of equity and inclusion that can direct resources where they're needed most. Some of the other effective strategies may include recruiting local teachers. The process of recruiting government teachers is cumbersome, bureaucratic, based on where you're born, where your domicile is from, and you're fixed there, and then there's the whole teacher transfer issue and the rationalization issue. Diversifying school calendars. In some areas of Punjab and Sindh, we see that during the harvest season, there's a significant drop in attendance. So perhaps our school calendars don't really need to follow the summer-winter plans, etc. Formalizing multi-grade teaching. So now, multi-grade teaching is another phenomena in the public education landscape of Pakistan, where a single teacher in primary school is teaching grades from 1 to 5 all in one classroom. This is in part due to lack of teachers in that area, or lack of space for classrooms for all the students to be seated in. So this is a reality, and this is also, there's also community-based factors behind that. So this is a reality in Pakistan that is probably going to stay. So instead of trying to eradicate that by we're building more schools, etc., even though we do need to have more schools in some areas, but it's time to accept this reality, and there are methods of equipping teachers, training our teachers to handle multi-grade, where students of different age groups and different learning levels can be learning together. And then identifying cost-effective programs for children with disabilities. And the third recommendation would definitely be ensuring safe spaces for girls by providing safe transportation for female teachers and students, building boundary walls, hiring female teachers, and providing washroom and water facilities and hygiene facilities that can significantly improve the gender equality in our enrollment in public schools. The next fourth message that we had was the management and coordination of the sector. And as we see, as I mentioned, that even after a decade of devolution, the provinces have some challenges, some of which could be the inefficient teacher deployment. This means that there are schools where there are 15 teachers, and there's a school nearby that has a single teacher. And this is a phenomena that we see across most provinces as well. So solutions can include improving the education management information system data management, strengthening the stakeholder coordination, and reducing bureaucratic duplication. We had some conversation earlier on the middle tier, on the district level, that needs to be explored and studied more. After the devolution, we need to see that how can we leverage this whole tier. There's a missing tier in the middle between the provinces and the actual schools. How can we leverage those to effectively deliver these services? And then, of course, as I said, increasing accountability of federal, provincial, and district levels for service delivery. The final message is on parents and civil society. This is something that we feel is very important to highlight, that currently there is no involvement there's no agency of parents in public schools, right? So they're not involved in education budgeting, etc. There need to be formal platforms that can be established, and these could help in the effectiveness of budgetary and policy making process in Pakistan's education system. So some of the recommendations that come out here are ensuring national diagnostic student assessments occur regularly. So information on your child's learning achievements in school can help parents be more involved in the schools and the decision making that the schools do in terms of budget and focus where the attention is needed most. Involving parents, academics, and civil society in education budgetary decision can make clarify goals and increase education relevance for children and their families, and result in more effective resource allocation. And continued civil society engagement following budget approval process can enhance technical collaboration for improved policy making and execution, because there are technical areas that can be highlighted. You can have academics come in and review the budgets and highlight which areas need to be focused more and need more technical collaboration on. And finally, I would like to end here on this note, that these key messages are based off the public expenditure review of the education sector by the World Bank, as I mentioned before. The PER is a standard report that the bank produces, and it differs from country to country, but we use all available education data. And in this case, we use PSLM data as well, household surveys, and we collected budget information, phone surveys to reach out to parents, etc., student learning assessment, and this report has brought forward the narrative that I just presented. The education team will be releasing the full version of this report in another couple of weeks, and then we will be reconvening with some of the stakeholders to have more deeper discussion on these areas. But thank you so much for listening, and I'll end my presentation now.
Thank you, Maliha. We have a response from PIDE. Shahid Mahmood, Research Fellow, PIDE, will giving a response to this presentation.
Thank you, Maliha. Just a few quick pointers on the detailed presentation. Well, first of all, let me begin by saying that merely, and this is a well-known fact, look, merely throwing money at a problem won't solve that problem. Right? So it's not a money issue. It's not about, the first thing that we usually hear about in terms of educating Pakistan and education is that we are spending way less than what is required. Well, fine. How do we say that we are spending, and what exactly are we getting out of it? It's not, let me just contend that it's not that we don't spend money. In fact, we spend a lot of money. Look at all the, and it's not just the taxpayer money. Remember that a lot of official development assistance aid comes in, and education is one of the sectors which receives the highest amount of official development assistance. But look at all those indicators, and Maliha already mentioned some of them. What are the indicators? What are the outcomes of all this expenditure? And it's almost nothing. We don't stand anywhere when it comes to quality indicators and competing at international level. And then why would you want to throw so much more money on a highly inefficient edifice? And it's underlined by a very rent-seeking, it's a lot of rent-seeking going on in there. So you have a lot of institutions. Let me just mention one, textbook board. It has billions of rupees. You spend a lot of rupees, you give them a lot of budget like that, of billions of rupees, millions and billions of rupees. What does it achieve? It achieves nothing. And why would you want to throw more money on that kind of rent-seeking edifice? So you really need, when somebody says that we need to spend like 4 or 5% of GDP on education, and we need to increase it, then the first thing that you need to understand is that you need to change the underlying fundamentals. We've experimented a lot, whether it's Danish schools, whether it's stuffing children in public schools just to make the enrollment rates look good. What's the end result? You spend billions of rupees, in the end there is nothing coming out of it. It's just a waste of taxpayer money, whether it's official development assistance, whether it's loans, whether it's grants. It's a waste. You can do it in any other way. You can call it teacher training for capacity building. We've heard this name a lot. This is probably one of the most abused terms in Pakistan, capacity building. But it doesn't give you anything. Nothing is coming out of it. The second thing, it's a bit surprising that the report doesn't contain it. There is little or no mention of how technology can be used or technology can be utilized. Let's call it EdTech, another name for it, to close that gap or to create a more level playing field. For example, if you look at it in context of that yawning gap between the public schools, the poorly performing public schools, and the good quality private schools, that gap can be minimized by the use of technology, but we don't find a lot of mention of it or analysis of how technology can be leveraged in this case. We believe that EdTech can be used to achieve education equity without the further need for substantial investment in infrastructure. We already have a lot of infrastructure. We don't need that anymore. It should be about quality. It should be about efficiency. It shouldn't be about quantity. Another point, and that is, I'll quickly go through that, is that to bring change to this highly inefficient system, and where there is a lot of rent seeking going on, you really need to understand and parse all these complex layers that underlie this system. So, for example, let me just give you an example that there is not one aspect of education. There are a few aspects of education. One is the social aspect. The other is the cost benefit or the financial aspect. Pakistan's education system fails at both of them. So let's consider the financial aspect. We have, PIDE conducted a survey, and it came out with the finding that almost 34 to 35% of your graduates are unemployed. So this is not a money problem. Their unemployment is not a problem of money. Their unemployment is a problem of markets not functioning well enough to create opportunities so that these graduates can be absorbed. And as Dr. Ahmed Waqar Qasim already demonstrated well in his presentation, it's about the regulatory burden within the economy that hampers that creation of job. So it's not about throwing money. So, and the other aspect, let me turn to which Maliha did mention was, and they did discuss it on their chapter in Parents and Civil Society. But the emphasis is mostly on the budgeting process. You have to go beyond budgeting to see why local level issues are not being solved there. It's a highly centralized system, and without an empowered local government, you cannot have better community active participation of a community that can solve those issues related to education or other ones. So these are the few points. Other than that, I would find myself in agreement with a lot of points that Malia already made. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahid. I'll request Maliha Haider to please join me on stage for question and answer session. Please raise your hands for questions.
So should we just start with question answers, or I can start with responding very briefly to Shahid Saab's points, if that sounds okay. So Thank you. It seems that you seem to agree with us as well. The full report is not out yet. We are not saying spend more. We are definitely saying spend efficiently. But there is still a need to spend more, with 26.2 million children still out of school, with learning poverty where it is. The initiatives that are needed to spend more efficiently will need an increase in budget, and provincial will need a provincial increase in budget as well. The number for 4% spend on GDP is a universally accepted number that is prescribed and advised by UNICEF for countries to allocate their portion of GDPs. They are something that are called smart buys in education, cost-effective interventions and more impactful interventions as compared to other interventions. Now, this is based on a report that was compiled by the Global Education Advisory Panel, Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, based on 13,000 researchers across the world, where they categorized, and I'll make sure that I share a link to that report as well with my presentation. They categorized some good smart buys in education, some good buys, some bad buys. Technology has actually been categorized as a bad buy, because technology alone itself cannot do much for education. We want to build computer labs, we want to provide tablets, etc., not unless you leverage how that technology is used, which comes back to the point on training teachers, capacitating teachers to be enabled and to be able to use that technology to improve their student learning outcomes. Infrastructure, yes, we should go beyond infrastructure, but the sad reality is, I'll give you the example of Sindh alone. It has 40,000 public schools. 38,000 of those schools are primary schools. We say that the girls drop out after primary. There are many reasons, okay, community, cultural, etc. No, they have nowhere to go. There are no secondary schools. So yes, don't build more schools. Maybe utilize the current existing infrastructure. So spend efficiently. And I think, yes, on unemployment, I agree that this is something where the market should also step in. There should be these vertical linkages between your schools, your universities, and your employers. And finally, completely agree on your point on empowered local government. And as this report comes out, inshallah, in the next couple of weeks, there'll be more details on that chapter on parental and community involvement. So I'll stop here now. I know we have to wrap up soon, but very happy to take 3 questions from the audience. Yes, sir. I saw your hand first.
I think I have the mic. Finally, Tahira Abdullah and Ms. Heather's presentation, followed by the comments from PIDE. There's a lot that needs to be said and commented upon, but I will confine myself to just 2 or 3 little minor brief points. The PIDE comment focused on the fact of infrastructure, and I agree that we do need to maybe rationalize the infrastructure that we do have, but I also agree with the World Bank that we need to focus on secondary and higher education, especially for rural areas and especially for girls and people living with disabilities. So there's a little bit to be said on both sides. PIDE also informed us that a large percentage of graduates, educated people, don't find jobs and they're looking for jobs. This ties in with my next point, which is to do with one subject in the education sector, which unfortunately both the World Bank and PIDE have, I don't know whether consciously or unconsciously, deliberately or not, chosen to omit, and that is curriculum. I think unless the World Bank and PIDE and the government of Pakistan and the provincial governments, because education is supposed to be a devolved subject, do not look at curriculum, everything else will just fall by the wayside, and we will lose any and all gains that we do by investing in the education sector, whether it's 1.5% or whether it's 5% or any other percent that we choose to come up with of the GDP allocation to education. The curriculum is totally wrong in the public sector. Especially after 2021, the single national curriculum imposed by parliamentary law and by provincial assemblies is all wrong. It is a mala fide, bad-intentioned law, and the curriculum and the textbooks. I'm glad that people have taken the time to look at the single national curriculum law and its outcome since 2021. We have gone back to the dark ages of Ziaul Haq with curriculum, especially with regard to women, religious and ethnic minorities, and the lack of inculcation of critical thinking, the spirit of inquiry, progressive outlooks, pluralism, diversity, respect for democracy and the rule of law. All this has been deliberately taken out in the single national curriculum and in the textbooks that followed after 2021. This needs funding. It needs budgeting. It needs experts from outside the public sector to look at, because the public sector, so-called education experts in inverted commas, we know what constraints they are under, especially with rising Talibanization, rising militarization, rising extremism. These are things that the public sector will not look at. It's people like us who have to look at these issues. And we need funding to look at these issues. So when the World Bank talks about budgeting and the PIDE talks about reform priorities for Pakistan, to my mind, this is the priority and the fundamental reform, along with population management and population stabilization. Ceasefire now.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was a very, very passionate and close to my heart speech that you gave. I just want to start by saying that as a mother of a grade 6 child, I suffer with the single national curriculum textbooks as well. But I also recall that the single national curriculum was removed, replaced by the national core curriculum, which doesn't enforce the implementation. But I know that that has not really happened. I know, like I said, my child still has those textbooks. But in terms of what the bank's stance is, I mentioned that when we talk about efficiencies, when we talk about teacher preparedness, it is the teacher learning materials. It is, and I said that we will be coming out with the report with more details on this, on structured pedagogy, on teaching material, on learning material in classrooms that definitely need focus on. Yes, and curriculum reform is certainly with the government and certainly would require stakeholder involvement as well. So I agree with you. Like I said, from a personal perspective, I do agree with you. And I think it is an incremental process. The government does not call it the single national curriculum anymore. It is now the national core curriculum. But if there is a representative from the government, from the National Curriculum Council or anyone, if they would like to pitch in, but this is an agenda that the government should be taking up, and I agree with you on that.
Humayun Iqbal Shami, my question is, when you say that 2.4% of GDP spent on education, do you mean that's only the federal expenses, or it includes the provincial expenses? Because the major of the spendings by the provinces are definitely on education. So how do you say that?
That's the overall national expenses, so gone to provinces as well. The overall budget is 2.4% of GDP, the allocation.
Including provincial expenses?
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes.
Thank you. I was thinking of if education is treated as a public good at the highest level and does it enjoy our highest priorities? So I'll request that to jog the memories of all audience here. A couple of years back when some pregnant woman used to deliver a baby in hospital corridor because of unavailability of beds and so forth, that issue was highlighted as a measure of performance of health department of provincial government, and they were taken to task. They were literally buried. But when it comes to the cognitive abilities, which is an exclusive thing, benefit accrues to private individuals and households, and talk about the consciousness and all lofty things we expect from good education system. I'm not talking about that. So that is not in the domain. So now what has happened over the last decades or 15 years, ever since this has been devolved, the resource have gone up. Access has improved, but the learning outcomes have not improved. Learning poverty, on the contrary, has gone up, which should concern us. Now, this is not in discourse. This is not in media, which means this is not our concern. So how can we think of making an inclusive society where individuals, societies, cities, provinces, countries are conscious of that they are part of the society, local society, regional society, global society, they have a role, and children must not only be taught to gain cognitive abilities for all good things, reading and computation and whatnot, but also to be a good citizen. So, and then if we contrast existence of Pakistan into maybe 2 or 3 eras, when despite the lack of resources, there was more increase in the educational outcome, and now when we have more resources flowing in, and most of that resource flow is picked by the payroll, still we are suffering on the learning outcome. So we have to go a little deeper. It's probably our apathy to the declining education landscape of Pakistan, which should concern us, and otherwise we cannot improve the situation. We cannot make a good society.
Malia Bibi and Naeem Saab, I don't know what learning outcomes are. Please explain. I don't know what learning poverty is. I know we love to make up these terms because they're very good for publications. But a few years ago, I did a survey of taxi drivers in Dubai. And 2 of them became very violent with me, almost beat me up. They said, it is because of you that I'm a taxi driver in Dubai. I've got a BA, but I drive a taxi in Dubai. So please don't tell me about education, because you guys forced me to waste 12 years and I've come to Dubai and I'm a taxi driver. Same thing, he said to me, I won't educate my kids, because if I educate them, they will be your drivers. So I don't want to give you an educated driver. So my question is, where is the demand for education? I think if we want education, you and I want education, we want to give everybody an education because we want good servants who are well educated, who can read English, etc. They don't, why should they pay for it? If education is a social good, then I think the World Bank should pay for it. Otherwise, quite frankly, we are quite happy where we are. Second, another thing, first question is there's no demand for education, because quite frankly, education to me or to anybody is a career choice. If they don't have a career, why should they get educated? You're wasting their time by making them educated, and then they don't have a career. So we have 10,000 people who leave this country every year because they've got educated, they've got nowhere to go. Some of them go to the World Bank, some of them go to the IMF, some of them go to the US. So we are migrating our talent away. We are a talent-repellent country. The second thing is that we think education is just giving kids books. And as Shahid pointed out, what about EdTech? We don't talk about EdTech. EdTech is a simple solution. I remember my bad teachers harmed me forever. They killed me forever, the bad teachers. I wish I had EdTech then, I wish I had Coursera then, right? Now, we don't talk about leveling the playing field for these kids. And then finally, education is not just about books. What about extracurricular activities? What about character building, etc.? We don't talk about that. Now what we've done is we have not zoned for schools in this country. There are no zoning for schools in this country. We build schools in houses. 85% of our schools are in houses. They are in places where bedrooms are classrooms, bathrooms are classrooms, and we're calling them schools. And there is no library in that school, there's no playground in that school. So quite frankly, I think we need to talk about education more broadly than learning outcomes and learning failures, or God knows whatever these terms are that we love to use because they sound very good to us. I don't even know what they mean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem. So just very quickly on your points. Why there is no demand for education is because of the quality of education that we just spoke about. When you ask what learning outcomes mean, when we talk about learning, I'm not saying mathematical calculations, I'm not saying achievement of a differentiation integration. Simply a 10-year-old child going to school for 4 years plus cannot read a text that is for 10-year-old, right? You cannot read, you cannot learn. You need to be able to read to learn. EdTech technology, great. You cannot read, how are you going to use EdTech? Like I also mentioned, evidence shows with over 13,000 pieces of research that EdTech technology alone is a bad buy. So I want to keep repeating that if we think the solution is just bring in EdTech, it is not a good buy until you fix the system as a whole, and until the teachers are prepared to use that technology to facilitate their children, and until the children are at that basic level where they can read to be able to use that technology. So it is the quality of education that reduces the demand for education. And second point, that EdTech is not is a buzzword, but it is not the end-all and solution for all unless it is combined with relevant interventions inside the classroom. Yeah, I'll pause here. And
I would like to bring your attention towards, let's say that we say 26 million students out of the school right now, children. But at the very same time, where we look at these donor agencies, everybody say that they are spending on education, UNICEF, UNDP, so many all. So do you think that there is a lot of lack of accountability as well? I mean, funding is coming in. If it is going to the government, it's not being distributed well, number one. At the very same time, we see that we, as Pakistanis, haven't really put education as priority. I mean, we have these donor agencies, they're spending money on, let's say, empowering Afghan refugees. Let's say they doing XYZ projects on wash and things like that, whereas what is needed is education. So we as Pakistanis need to put this up, that our prime focus is education at the moment, and this is the foremost, and then everything that you want to give us funding for comes later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I just want to respond to that very quickly, that yes, the scale of the challenge is huge. Donor agencies, NGOs, CSOs, they come in with solutions. That, like I said, their pocket of solutions, we need to move towards scaling the effective ones across, right? And you know, this is a discussion that goes beyond just the 20 minutes that I had to present. So if we're talking about why WASH, you know, why this? So there are different elements that research and evidence shows do contribute. Evidence shows that, okay, girls drop out of school because there are no schools, but girls also drop out of schools where there are schools because of lack of boundary walls, WASH facilities, etc. So these are the smaller side interventions that need to be focused on for the holistic picture, right? But as I said, the challenge is huge. Why are we at 26 million or 20 million or 20.22 million out of school children population today? Because our population is also increasing incrementally, right? So the graph, if you see, is quite straight. So there are dropouts, but there's a lot of stock coming in. So just to respond to that there is a huge challenge that we need to address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maliha. I can see few hands, so as I said earlier, you can catch her at lunch. This was all for today. Thank you all the presenters for setting out the agendas straight out there, and I hope everyone has something to think about, to talk about. In the end, I would just want to say that keep talking, keep thinking, so we can bring in Islah and have a brighter future. With that, I would like to thank you everyone for joining us today. Join us for lunch. Thank you. Take care.